Chapter 265. What was he going to do at the princess residence? Of course, it was to be a male pet. Dong Quan smiled and glanced at Gong Chung with his deep eyes. Then, it would be impolite of me to refuse. Eldest princess residence. 2 days later, Gong Yimo finally had her own house. She was excited for a long time and walked around the residence. She found that the residence was really good. It was magnificent, and there was even a big hot spring. She was really happy. After eating and walking around, Gong Yimo washed up and prepared to sleep. Such a big house and such a big bed. She could roll sideways. In the end, just as she happily jumped onto the bed, she suddenly felt strange because the quilt moved. At this time, she was lying on her stomach and looked up in surprise. She saw the quilt slide down and unexpectedly, a naked man. A man? Gong Yimo sat up with a swoosh and her whole body tensed up. What was going on? Why was there a man on her bed? When she saw the other person's appearance, Gong Yimo really wanted to vomit blood. Her eyes were wide open, full of disbelief. Why was this guy on her bed? Was the sky going to collapse? The scene changed to the day of the poetry competition. Gong Chung saw that the other party agreed and was very happy. Then, he asked Chang Shi to investigate this person's life. If there were no problems, he would be sent directly to the princess residence 2 days later. Chang Shi checked and found that this person came from a very remote western region. His results were good, and he was admitted to the capital. Although his appearance was a bit exotic, but that was because his mother was a foreigner. Other than that, there were no other suspicious points. With a big wave of his hand, it was finalized. But what they didn't expect was that there was indeed a student from the western region. But after he came to the capital, because he was riding a horse, his face was disfigured before he could enter the city. Recently, the gauze was removed. That is to say, after he came to the capital, no one knew what he looked like before. But other people didn't know, but Gong Yimo knew. She saw the man lazily sit up from under the blanket. His slightly curly hair hung in front of his chest, accentuating his well-defined muscles and extremely masculine chest. Looking up, it was an exquisite collarbone and a handsome face with distinct features. His facial features were deep, and his forehead was full. There was a kind of captivating beauty to him, especially his pair of eyes that were so blue that they were almost purple. Sometimes, they would flash with a beast-like light. "Your Highness." His deep voice was like a veil caressing one's ears. It was very pleasant to listen to. The faint, domineering aura around him and the calmness of a mature man were enough to make any little girl blush. When he saw Gong Yimo in a daze, he couldn't help but smile. His smile was so handsome that one couldn't take their eyes off him. "Please allow me to introduce myself. I am your boy toy, Dong Quan." Gong Yimo was numb, but the villain in his heart was flipping the table. What the hell is East Spring? This person was clearly the King Lu Yi that she had burned to death. Dragon City Limitless. That young monarch who had ascended the throne for less than 2 years and had received praise from both inside and outside the court. Dragon City Limitless. Even though Gong Yimo tried her best to restrain her emotions, the other party's keen senses were like that of a wild beast. He narrowed his eyes and slowly crawled towards Gong Yimo. His movements were like that of a healthy leopard. "Your Highness, you seem to be surprised to see me." The last syllable at the end revealed a sense of danger. Gong Yimo swallowed her saliva and sternly said, "I don't need a boy toy. Please get off my bed." She had to think carefully. This person wasn't staying in Lu Yi. What was his motive for coming to Daiyu State? Or should she just directly capture him? But the other party obviously didn't want to let her go just like that. Dragon City Limitless inched closer. His movements were very careful, just like a fierce beast that was close to its prey. No matter how he disguised himself, the wildness in his bones was hard to hide. But what should I do? When I saw Princess, I couldn't control myself. I just wanted to. He reached out to touch her face, but his hand was pushed away by Gong Yimo. She opened her eyes and very calmly said, "Get off my bed. Otherwise, I'll be happy to personally throw you out." His hand was hit and felt a little numb. Dragon City Limitless looked at his hand that was hit. His heart was unconvinced, and his eyes flashed with anger. In Lu Yi, as long as he beckoned with his finger, countless women would flock to him. Moreover, he was very confident in himself. His figure and appearance were much better than Diyu's, these weak scholars who couldn't withstand the wind. He believed that Gong Yimo definitely knew what beauty was, but she had rejected him. This made him very unhappy, but he was very interested in Gong Yimo. So even though he was a little angry, he suppressed it and approached again. Moreover, as he moved, the quilt continued to slide down, revealing his narrow waist and abdominal muscles. "Princess, are you not moved by me at all?" He smiled. That handsome face was oppressive, making Gong Yimo's whole body tense up. Sensing her nervousness, Dragon City, Limitless smiled. He knew it. How could a woman not be moved by him? Who knew that in the next second, Gong Yimo would pounce on him and push him down on the bed. This position was very novel, and it made him a little helpless for a moment. "Princess, the night is long. Don't be impatient." His eyes flickered with a determined light as he revealed a mouthful of white teeth. He would soon leave Dayu State. If he could have a taste of this princess today, it wouldn't be bad. Who knew that Gong Yimo would suddenly sneer? In the next second, he was wrapped up by Gong Yimo and thrown out. The moment he landed, Dragon City, Limitless couldn't help but reveal his skills. He flipped in the air and landed lightly like a cheetah. The quilt fell to the ground. He was only wearing a pair of pants, and it was a little cold in the cold wind. Gong Yimo stood at the door and glanced at him. Suddenly, she smiled and closed the door. Dragon City Limitless only felt a stifling feeling in his heart that he couldn't vent. He waited at the door for a long time unwillingly. Who knew that Gong Yimo really didn't open the door and went asleep? His face darkened, and he couldn't hold back his anger any longer. At that moment, even Gong Yimo, who was pretending to be asleep, could feel his murderous aura. It was the first time in his life that he was thrown out of the bed by someone. How long had it been since he felt this kind of humiliation? Dragon City Limitless was even more suspicious. Was it because his charm had faded? Or was it because Gong Yimo didn't understand? She actually threw him out at such a time. Didn't she have any desire for the relationship between a man and a woman? But after his anger subsided, he coldly curled his lips again. At least Gong Yimo had succeeded in one thing. He was really becoming more and more interested in her. He only hoped that Gong Dai would find him later. This way, he still had a chance to eat this delicious little princess. Chapter 268. In Lu Yi, no one had ever dared to treat him like this. Everyone was respectful to him, and he had never experienced such humiliation and anger. What's more, he didn't expect that he would feel impulsive under such stimulation. No, it must be because of that sachet. I don't know if I died miserably. Her clear and melodious voice was like a seductive voice, making people unable to stop themselves. But when I think about how I can play with the noble King Lu Yi like this, I feel very impulsive. She didn't know if that one word of hers triggered Long Chung Wuji, but the first reaction in his mind wasn't that she had seen through his identity, but that he hoped that she was really as she said, that she was very impulsive towards him. "You. How did you?" Long Chung Wuji, who was slow to react, opened his eyes wide. He had ascended the throne not long ago, and in Lu Yi, he often wore a half-iron mask. Very few people had seen him before, so how did Gong Yimo know him? At this moment, he finally had a premonition of danger. But now, this scene made it impossible for him to escape even if he wanted to. He was the noblest eagle's son on the prairie. This was the first time he had been so passive. "Don't worry. I won't kill you." Gong Yimo's promise made him feel relieved, because he knew very well that Gong Yimo was the kind of person who would do what she said. But the malicious smile on her face made his scalp go numb. "So, in order to repay me for not killing you, scream out loud." "Pa." Longcheng Wuji gritted his teeth. Even if he died, she would never yield to Gong Yimo. "One day, I'll make you suffer under me until you die." "Pa." Gong Yimo did not hold back at all. She even felt a little happy. "I will definitely kill you." She smiled faintly. "Anyway, you're not the first person to say that." "Well, One more or one less wouldn't make a difference. As for Gong Dai's side, he successfully captured Hua Zhou. At this moment, Hua Zhou's face was gloomy. She didn't know how Gong Dai found her. In the carriage, she secretly glanced at Gong Dai's face. It had to be said that Gong Dai was really good-looking. Moreover, any young girl would probably prefer someone like Gong Dai who was cold and exquisite in terms of looks. Therefore, when she looked at him like this, she couldn't take her eyes off him. However, at the thought of their opposing relationship, Hua Zhou snorted coldly. "Where are you taking me?" Gong Dai had been resting with his eyes closed, ignoring her. This made Hua Zhou very angry. In Luyi, she was a goddess revered by all. It was Lu Ye's #1 beauty. However, the man in front of her only glanced at her when she was brought out. After that, he never looked at her again. This made her very frustrated. "Hey, am I not beautiful?" Seeing that he was ignoring her, Hua Zhou sat closer to him. The sons and daughters of the grasslands were not as bashful as those of the interior. They dared to love and hate, and said whatever they wanted. However, even though she took the initiative to get closer, Gong Dai still ignored her. She couldn't help but become even angrier. In the end, she sat beside Gong Dai. At this moment, Gong Dai suddenly opened his eyes and looked at her coldly. This glance made Hua Zhou feel as if she was facing her own cousin. She glared at him indignantly, but she appeared fierce on the outside. "I'm Lu Ye's #1 beauty. Why aren't you looking at me?" Gong Dai finally spoke. However, his next words made Hua Zhou's hair stand on end. "If you don't sit back down, I don't mind pulling out your tongue." A threat, spoken in such a flat tone, really made Hua Zhou's scalp tingle. Although she was indignant, she still sat back down. If Longqing Wuji saw her obedient look, he would be surprised. After sitting back down, the more Hua Zhou thought about it, the more frustrated she felt. "I know you like Gong Yimo. Could it be that with my looks, I can't compare to Gong Yimo?" This was what she was most indignant about, and it was also the reason she came to Dayu State. However, last time, she only saw Gong Yimo from afar, and because of the rain, she felt that although Gong Yimo was beautiful, it was just so. However, she didn't expect Gong Dai to really look at her. In the end, he actually smiled. Usually, people who didn't smile often looked very moving when they smiled, just like Gong Dai. At that moment, Hua Zhou clearly felt that she liked her cousin, but she couldn't help but feel her heart beat a few times, and even her breathing became sluggish. "There's no need to compare," he said. "You don't have the right." Gong Yimo was tired of whipping, so she found a chair and sat down. Then, when she saw Longqing Wuji's current appearance, she was a little amused. At this moment, his hair was spread out, and that long curly hair fell on his chest. Although he wasn't exercising, his chest was violently rising and falling. Under the light, it was as if his whole body was suffused with a pink glow, and it was very appetizing. Gong Yimo held a cup of tea in her hand, and she slowly drank it. There were many whip marks on his body, but they weren't serious and would probably heal in a few days. There were also a little bit of wax, which was very eye-catching. At this moment, he was frowning with his eyes closed, and his whole body was soaked in a thin layer of sweat, as if he had just done some intense exercise. Even when he opened his eyes to look at her, there was a hint of confusion. This made Gong Yimo feel very accomplished. In her previous life, the thing that left the deepest impression on Gong Yimo about Longqing Wuji was that he had countless concubines. His concubines were really many, and all of them were very beautiful. She would often hear rumors about him having multiple concubines at night, and it was very colorful. This made Gong Yimo very curious, whether he was really that powerful. Originally, she didn't want to mess with him like this, but who told him to touch her the moment he saw her, thinking of things that were not suitable for children? Then she could only provoke him and give him an unforgettable night. Thinking of this, she got up and brought a cup of tea to Longqing Wuji's mouth. He seemed to be very thirsty, and without any precaution, he drank the entire cup of tea. In the process, his Adam's apple moved, and those low fluttering eyelashes made Gong Yimo have the illusion that he was a docile cat. But she was also very clear. This time, she took advantage of her previous life and seized the opportunity. If they were to fight face to face, she wouldn't have this opportunity to mess with him. And he wouldn't be a cat. If she really wanted to compare, he would probably be an eagle or a cheetah. If you were confused by his mask, you would only die a terrible death. But this didn't stop her from enjoying his docility. Seeing that he was so quiet, Gong Yimo was happy and said a sentence that was very annoying. "How is it? This is my special trick. Are you surprised? Are you surprised?" Chapter 269. Long Chung Wuji no longer had the strength to glare at her. He secretly swore in his heart. Whatever he had suffered today, one day he would repay it all on Gong Yimo. Double the repayment. Gong Yimo did not need to guess to know what he was thinking. But she did not mind, because she knew that after today, Long Chung Wuji would not have any power over her. She lowered her eyelids and hooked a thin chain from his hair. He was quite thoughtful. He actually hid that thing in his slightly curly long hair. Usually, when he tied it up, he would also hide it in his hair bun. Realizing what she was thinking, Long Chung Wuji suddenly opened his eyes wide. His eyes were filled with ruthlessness. Impudent. Stop it. But no matter how ferocious his expression was, Gong Yimo did not slow down at all. Luyi was a very mysterious country. Their country also had a unique tradition that other countries did not have. For example, why would their high-ranking officials have a nameplate on them? This nameplate was given to them when they were born. It represented their identity, status, and everything. In Luyi, they called it the life nameplate. And there was a very important point. These nameplates could not be replicated. In Luyi, there was a very mysterious lake. The water in the lake was known as the sacred water. When every noble was born, if they wanted to make a nameplate, they would have to find the guardian of the sacred water lake, an old man. That old man would take a strand of hair from a fetus to make a nameplate. The nameplate made from his hands, when placed in the water, would emit a faint fluorescent light. And the nameplate was fused with the first strand of hair of a newborn baby. Naturally, it could not be replicated. At least, this was what Luyi people believed. And then they protected their nameplates as if they were protecting their lives. And Gong Yimo actually wanted to take away his nameplate? This was simply trampling on his dignity as a monarch. This was something that could not be allowed. So under this provocation, Long Chung Wuji actually broke free from the ropes. He suddenly pounced towards Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo could not dodge in time. Her hand was tightly holding onto his nameplate. She was actually pounced on, and the moment she fell to the ground, she snapped the chains and directly kept the nameplate into her space. So when King Luyi regained his senses, he was shocked. He searched his body but could not find his nameplate. His eyes darkened, cold and angry. He looked at Gong Yimo. "Give it back to me." The aura of a high position suddenly exploded. That gaze, it was as if he wanted to tear her into pieces. This stunned Gong Yimo for a moment. This was the king of Lui. If it was any other time, she wouldn't have had such an opportunity. However, one wrong step led to many wrong steps. Now, the initiative was in her hands. She directly used her martial arts to flip over, shaking off Long Chung Wuji and retreating a few steps. "Don't even think about getting what's in my hands." Gong Yimo. Long Chung Wuji stood up. His originally blue eyes were purple, but at this time, they showed a strange, deep black. Under his high nose, his thin lips were tightly pursed. He stared at Gong Yimo like an eagle in the sky staring at its prey. He wouldn't rest until one of them was dead. Even though he knew he was no match for her, he still fought with Gong Yimo. Anything could be snatched, but nameplates were definitely not. After completely releasing his aura, even if his martial arts were not as strong as Gong Yimo still found it very difficult to deal with him. King Lu Ye's martial arts were very powerful and he was very strong. Every time he attacked, Gong Yimo did not dare to face him head-on. She kept retreating. Then they fought from the room to the courtyard. Many servants ran out to see. They did not know what was going on. They only saw that the boy toy was suddenly fighting with the princess. They did not dare to delay and quickly slipped out to inform the others. Although Gong Yimo had the upper hand, she was also fighting with great difficulty and was unable to escape. Really, isn't it just a nameplate? Just treat it as giving it to me. Gong Yimo purposely provoked him, looking for a flaw. King Lu Yi was so angry that he laughed. He slightly curled his lips. At this moment, his upper body was naked and his muscles were bulging. In the night, he was full of wild elegance. He was very tall, especially when he was standing like this, facing others. That overwhelming aura made people feel suffocated. In Lu Yi, there are only two situations where you will give away your nameplate. The first is when I lose. His eyes were fixed on Gong Yimo, not relaxing. The second is when you exchange your nameplate with your wedding wife. Gong Yimo, are you going to marry me? Gong Yimo smiled lightly. Why? Can't it be you who lose? Completely defeated by me. His pupils shrank, and there was a trace of killing intent in his cold eyes. You forced me. He originally did not want to kill her. Following that, he suddenly whistled. That sound penetrated extremely far. Not long later, 7 to 8 experts jumped down from the roof. All of them were tall and big, and all of them were experts. If you hand over your nameplate now, I can still let you off. Otherwise, you can only follow me back to Lu Yi. Long Chung Wuji gave his final ultimatum. Gong Yimo flicked her sleeves and grabbed a hidden blade in her hand. She smiled and said, "Why don't you just bring me away?" So, the great King Lu Yi also has misgivings? When Long Chung Wuji heard that, his eyes narrowed like a tiger whose beard was grabbed, instantly becoming extremely dangerous. But Gong Yimo seemed to have not provoked him enough and continued. I think it's because you didn't bring many people. If you bring me, you won't be able to escape from Gong Dai's pursuit, right? Ha 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 ha. The great King Lu Yi also has fear? Shut up. I won't. Long Chung Wuji laughed. Gong Yimo, there will be a day when I will make you cry and beg me to take you. Gong Yimo was also angered by his words as she slowly raised her hidden blade. Don't think that just because you have more people, I will be afraid. I will cripple you right now. Just as both sides were about to start fighting again, suddenly numerous archers jumped onto the 4 roofs. They were all wearing soft armor and holding onto bows and arrows. Their actions were uniform, and in an instant, they aimed their arrows at Lu Yi and the rest. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo was delighted. Gong Dai really came at the right time, and his arrival meant that the matter had already been settled successfully. As expected, Gong Dai lightly jumped down from the roof and landed beside Gong Yimo. When he saw that Long Chung Wuji's upper body was half naked, those ambiguous marks made his pupils constricted. When he looked at him again, his eyes were filled with killing intent. King Lu Yi laughed. Gong Dai, don't tell me you think that with so few people, you will be able to defeat me? Gong Dai looked at him coldly and then stretched out his hand. His hand loosened and a nameplate fell out. The 2 words Wuyo especially irritated Long Chung Wuji's eyes. His premonition had indeed come true. Not only was Gong Yimo stalling for time to deal with him, she had even sent people to capture Wuyo. Gong Yimo laughed. Don't be so nervous. King Lu Yi, please be assured, we will not harm Miss Wuyo. What do you want? Chapter 270. No matter how unwilling Longcheng Wuji was, he could only bear with it. It would be unwise to go head-to-head at this point. Gong Yimo glanced at Gong Dai with a hint of pride in her eyes. Then, she smiled at Longcheng Wuji. It's very simple. My Dai Yu state wants to trade with Lu Yi. Longcheng Wuji sneered. So you captured Wu Yu? He looked at Gong Yimo, then at Gong Dai. Is this the sincerity of your Dai Yu state? Gong Yimo did not back down. Lu Yi sent people to assassinate me and almost caused me to lose my position. Is this your sincerity? Her gaze did not back down at all. Longcheng Wuji stared at her for a long time. Then, he chuckled. As expected, you are Lu Ye's greatest opponent. He waved his hand, and the people protecting him all retracted their power and walked behind him. Gong Yimo also softened her tone and bowed to him. She looked very friendly and giggled. It's just reciprocity. I believe that our little friction these days will not affect our future cooperation, right? Longcheng Wuji was amused. If Gong Yimo did not know who he was from the start, would he have lost so badly? She still had the nerve to talk about cooperation. However, he could only think about it. People in their positions would not lose the big picture for small gains. Hence, he laughed coldly. Yes, it won't affect. Not only that, I am very satisfied with your hospitality tonight. It makes me very comfortable. As he spoke, he looked at Gong Dai provocatively. However, he gritted his teeth and said to Gong Yimo, "One day, I will let you have a try." Feeling the sudden burst of cold air from Gong Dai, Gong Yimo's smile froze. You're welcome. Forget it." The other party snorted. "In that case, see you tomorrow." With that, he strode away. He had suffered enough blows today. Firstly, he had underestimated his opponent and didn't put a woman in his eyes. Secondly, he didn't know that Gong Yimo actually knew him. However, a loss was a loss. Not only did he lose his name tag, but he also lost his fiancée. It seemed that there would be a tough battle tomorrow. With Gong Yimo and Gong Dai in the Dayu state, it was too troublesome. Thinking of this, his eyes flashed with a trace of calculation, and his figure disappeared from the princess residence. Seeing him leave, Gong Dai waved his hand and all the archers withdrew. The servants quickly ran out and knelt in front of Gong Yimo in fear. Gong Yimo didn't have the mood to blame them. She waved her hand and sent them back to rest. She knew the emperor's character very well. The reason why these servants didn't dare to come near was probably because of her imperial father's intention. He was afraid that they would disturb her favorite male pet. This reason was very vexing. Seeing that everyone had left, Gong Yimo also prepared to rest. However, when she turned around, she realized that Gong Dai hadn't left yet. Gong Yimo pretended to yawn and prepared to leave. "Aya, I'm so tired. It's already so late. You can do as you please. I'm going to sleep first." With that, she prepared to slip away. However, how could Gong Dai be so easily dismissed? He chuckled softly. "Sleepy? Royal sister, I won't disturb you, but I want to ask, what did you do just now? Where did his clothes go?" Gong Yimo's back view suddenly froze. Then, she racked her brains to come up with a lie. At this moment, Gong Dai walked to her side. Seeing her rolling her eyes, his smile became gentler. "Royal sister, if you're lying to me, I'll be very angry." Although he said this in a very calm tone, Gong Yimo felt a chill run down her spine. It was really cold outside. However, without sending Gong Dai away, she didn't dare to enter the house. This was really... I wanted to find his name tag, so I took off his clothes. After all, who knows where he hid it on his body? Gong Yimo regretted it. She shouldn't have tried to delay time. She shouldn't have abused him for a moment of prank. She was wrong. Gong Dai really didn't expect that this kind of obvious lie would come from his weird royal sister. "Royal sister, you're being naughty again." His words were like a death sentence for her. Gong Yimo wanted to cry, but no tears came out. However, he didn't see it. She just didn't want to admit it. What could he do? Thinking of this, she gave an arrogant humph. "Forget it if you don't believe me. I'm going to sleep. See you tomorrow." Saying that, she ran into the house with her fastest speed and closed the door with her fastest speed. But at the last moment when she closed the door, Gong Dai's hand was stuck between the two doors. Gong Yimo braked in time and almost clipped his hand. Do you have anything else?" Through the gap of the door, Gong Yimo was filled with vigilance. Gong Dai smiled faintly and reached into his arms to pull out a paper bag. He opened the paper bag and a faint smell of burnt sugar wafted out. Gong Yimo took a whiff and knew that it was Sugar Heart Pavilion's sweet biscuits, and it was freshly baked. She looked at Gong Dai in disbelief. You went to kidnap Flower Boat Wu Yu and went to Sugar Heart Pavilion on your way back? And this sweet biscuit was only sold in the morning. That meant that Gong Dai had forced them to specially bake a batch for him in the middle of the night? What she didn't expect was that they didn't sell their desserts over the night, so they had specially baked one for her. Gong Dai passed the biscuit in his hand forward. "I know that you have something on your mind and won't be able to have a good dinner, so I brought some food for you." Saying that, he smiled and added, It's freshly baked, so it's very sweet. I specially asked him to bake it for a while longer, so it's very crispy. Gong Yimo swallowed her saliva. She really didn't eat much at night. Not only did Gong Dai understand her well, he had even put this understanding into action. She was really touched. So after hesitating for a while, she finally stretched out her trembling hand through the gap of the door, intending to take away his delicious food and eat it all for herself. But what she didn't expect was that just as she stretched out her hand, it was grabbed by Gong Dai. Seeing him suddenly smiling at her, Gong Yimo's heart thumped hard. Oh no! She had fallen into his trap. Gong Dai pulled her hand gently, and Gong Yimo fell out of the door and into his arms. He smiled lightly, but the words that came out of his mouth made Gong Yimo feel that a great disaster was about to befall her. Don't be afraid. I just want to know how the marks on King Lu Ye's body came about. He felt Gong Yimo's body suddenly tense up. She didn't even know how to resist being hugged by him. He narrowed his eyes and said faintly, "Don't worry, I'll just take a look." Gong Yimo thought that if she gave Gong Dai a kick and ran back quickly to keep all the props, would it be too late? But that was obviously impossible, and the source of all this trouble was the biscuit in her hand. Where was her integrity? She hugged the biscuit and refused to let go. She even cried. Why was she so easily fooled by a biscuit? This was simply illogical. Chapter 271. Gong Dai dragged her into the house unwillingly. The house was filled with a special smell. It was fine just now, but now that she smelled it, Gong Yimo blushed. This is... Gong Ju raised his eyebrows slightly. He was experienced and knowledgeable, so he immediately recognized the smell. At this time, he looked at Gong Yimo with a very dangerous and calm expression. It was as if he had caught the little fox's weakness and could threaten her to hand over all the snacks. Gong Yimo was speechless. What kind of analogy was she using? Gong Dai walked towards the study table. Gong Yimo quickly grabbed his hand and looked at him pleadingly. Gong Dai, aren't you sleepy? Gong Dai's eyes were smiling, but he still pretended to be cold. I'm not sleepy. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. Then are you hungry? She waved the biscuit in her hand and said softly, Let's have some snacks? Gong Dai couldn't help but laugh, but he still didn't relent. I'm not hungry. I'm not eating. Then, Gong Yimo was at a loss for words. In the end, she steeled her heart and said, Look then. Anyway, she didn't do anything. Yes, he did not do anything. She let go of his hand. Gong Dai looked at her, and then continued to walk towards the study table. At this moment, he first saw the whip on the table, the half-burnt candle, and the black rope on the floor. He raised his eyebrows slightly. Finally, he sat on the chair that Longqing Wuji sat on previously. Gong Yimo couldn't help but lower her head and didn't dare to look. What is this? He calmly picked up the whip. Gong Yimo was like a child who had done something wrong. She whispered, Whip? What about this? She glanced at it. Wax, candle wax. Gong Dai suddenly glanced at her. It looks interesting. Royal sister, do you want to try it on me? Gong Yimo widened her eyes. Don't, it's not fun. Gong Dai didn't allow her to reject and ordered domineeringly, Come here. She had just said these two words to Longqing Wuji. Every dog has its day. Gong Yimo wanted to cry but had no tears. She slowly moved towards him, but he reached out and pulled her into his arms. You like this? He suddenly closed the distance. Gong Yimo nervously shook her head. But Gong Dai said, It's okay. You can play with me in the future. Gong Yimo forgot to respond. She didn't know how to answer. At this time, Gong Ju pulled the paper bag from her hand. Aren't you hungry? Gong Yimo stared at him blankly. Could she be hungry now? Her silly expression melted Gong Dai's heart. He couldn't help but kiss her cheek. Gong Yimo suddenly wanted to resist. How could she sit on Gong Dai's lap? But in the next second, Gong Ju hugged him tightly. His eyes were cold, and his murderous intent overflowed. Or do you want to continue talking about these things? Royal sister, I'm curious. Why do you have some in your hands? His cold aura seemed to be tangible. And it's a set? Gong Yimo didn't dare to move anymore. Gong Dai was satisfied. He hugged her, broke the biscuit into pieces, and fed her little by little. Question: such a handsome and cool guy is hugging and feeding you gently. Are you touched? Gong Yimo: I don't dare to move. I don't dare to move. Scary. What kind of thoughts are these? Sensing Gong Yimo's absent-mindedness, Gong Dai pinched the tip of her nose in annoyance. So, you're still thinking about other men when you're in my arms? Gong Yimo hesitantly swallowed the biscuit in her mouth and tried to reason with him. Gong Dai, you're wrong. You. Eat the biscuit. He forced the biscuit into her mouth. Seeing that his expression had darkened, Gong Yimo didn't dare to say anything else and ate the biscuit obediently. During the process, Gong Ju watched her nervous little face as he fed her. His heart was filled with both happiness and powerlessness. Feeling the softness of her soft lips every time he fed her, Gong Dai's expression gradually relaxed. The murderous aura finally dissipated. He was actually angry, especially when he saw these props. Even though he knew that Gong Yimo wasn't at a disadvantage, he didn't want her to see any other man besides him. So he was serious about what he said just now. If she wanted to play this way, he would play along. But now, when he looked at her, he only felt pity. Do you remember? Back then in the Cold Palace, when we met for the second time, you did the same. You broke the steamed buns bit by bit and fed them to me. Gong Yimo's cheeks slowed down. She actually didn't remember many things that happened so long ago, especially some things that she thought were trivial. Gong Ju lowered his eyelids and continued to feed her. Maybe you don't remember clearly, but I remember everything that happened between us. Gong Yimo was about to speak when Gong Dai stuffed another biscuit into her mouth. I still remember that when I was young, I focused on practicing martial arts and didn't want to waste any time learning literature. At that time, you took a small willow whip and hit my palm. It didn't hurt, but you smiled proudly and told me that martial arts can establish a country, literature can pacify the country, and an outstanding man can't be biased. At that time, I was very obedient and went to write. Do you know why? Gong Yimo forgot to chew the biscuit in her mouth. She looked at him and asked in a muffled voice, Why? Gong Dai smiled. In an instant, he was as beautiful as a fairy in a painting. He stroked her hair. Because an unoutstanding man is not worthy of you. Not only do I want to be outstanding, I want to be the best. His words made Gong Yimo fall silent and lower her head. After leaving the Cold Palace, I realized that something seemed to have changed. I didn't want to leave you and walk out of your sight. I wanted to go back to the Cold Palace, just you and me. Gong Dai recalled the past. Those memories were like a painting that unfolded very clearly. Her every frown and smile were engraved in it. But later, I gradually understood that you were different. You don't belong to the Cold Palace, and even you don't belong to the Dayu state. I can choose to follow you, but I don't want to be behind you. You will never understand when I saw you in the West Continent. He described it tirelessly. Although his tone was cold, it was impossible to ignore the affection and sweetness in his voice. I thought that I was hallucinating, but when I saw you, at that moment, I actually had the thought that I was willing to die in a hallucination. He laughed softly. But it was really you. You sent yourself to my side. So I became more and more unable to control myself. All of this is your sin. His fingers landed on her eyebrows and eyes. His tone was extremely affectionate. You made me unable to control myself and fall in love with you. But I could see you, but I couldn't touch you. He sighed softly. You might not be able to imagine it, but when we were in the palace, I didn't even dare to look at you. I wanted to keep staring at you, but I was afraid that you would find out about this abnormal feeling and hate me. So, I endured it again and again. I didn't dare to do anything out of line. Chapter 272. That's great. He suddenly smiled. You've discovered my feelings, so I finally don't have to endure anymore. Those days where my heart clearly longs for something, but I can only endure it. It's too painful. I don't want to live such a life for even one more day. Now, I just want your eyes to reflect the scene of me kissing you. I want you to see me going crazy for you. I want your eyes to be tainted with lust." As he spoke, he fed the last bit of the biscuit into her mouth. Then, he lowered his head and snatched it over. Their lips touched for a moment, and both of them could taste the cloying sweetness. Gong Yimo wanted to retreat, but it was too late. She was hugged by Gong Dai, and they were getting closer and closer. His eyes were really beautiful, and just as he said, the madness in the depths of his eyes made her feel as if she was being burned by fire. She wanted to retreat, but her lips were sealed by him once again. And this time, she could clearly feel the difference. The scorching heat from his body was simply abnormal. If this continued, she would definitely be eaten up today. Gong Yimo was tightly entangled by him, but her eyes were fixed on the sachet on the table. It must be this sachet's doing. She reached out, wanting to take the sachet and put it in her space. But when she reached out, Gong Dai found the opportunity to carry her up and press her down on the table. Scary. She was going to be eaten up. Gong Yimo was horrified to find that she had no strength to resist this position. The table was very high, and at this moment, her legs were hanging in the air. She had no strength at all. Gong Dai even used one hand to hold her hands behind her head. Those dark jade eyes were filled with lust at this moment. "What are you doing?" he panted and asked. His voice was low and hoarse, as if he was rubbing her ears. At the same time, he reached out to take the sachet and finally kissed her earlobe. "Are you looking for this?" He propped himself up, then brought the sachet to his nose and took a deep breath. When she opened her eyes again, Gong Yimo felt that the pressure on his body had suddenly become heavier. The desire in his eyes was so terrifying that it almost devoured her. At this moment, he was looking down at her from above. His dangerous aura made Gong Yimo want to hold her breath, but he insisted on sending the sachet towards her nose. "Royal sister, don't you have any desire for me?" Gong Dai's voice was fervent and hoarse. "Why am I so thirsty for you?" When Gong Yimo heard his passionate words, she was caught off guard and took a deep breath. The rich fragrance entered her nose and turned into a wave of heat in an instant. The heat wave traveled along his respiratory tract to his lungs and burned his lower abdomen. Then, when she opened her eyes again, her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. She, who had always been pure, actually felt a trace of unbearable heat. What was wrong with her? Gong Dai was pleasantly surprised by her change. He couldn't wait to lower his head and continue kissing her. At the same time, he restrained himself and gave her the most gentle experience. He wanted her to like this feeling, to like him. Why did he have to restrain himself? Perhaps he had really grown up. After all, it wasn't 3 years ago. At that time, he was afraid that she would leave, so he wanted to use this method to keep her. But now, he was getting stronger day by day. He also understood that if he truly loved someone, he could force them, but he couldn't force them on such matters. He was willing to wait for the day when she was willing, or even the day of their wedding. So during this period of time, all the teasing was just to quench his thirst. Royal sister, she could rest assured. He wouldn't be like before, because now, his mentality and ability had become stronger once again. It was just that she was too sweet. If he wasn't careful, his soul would be hooked. After the passionate kiss, he straightened up and saw that Gong Yimo's face was slightly red. Her eyes were watery as she stared at him blankly. She seemed to be wondering, why did he stop? This look almost made him lose all his rationality. So, he lowered his head again. This time, Gong Yimo was very docile. Not only did she not resist him, she even made Gong Dai feel that she was cooperating with him. "Royal sister, don't tempt me anymore." He kissed her red lips until they were swollen before he left regretfully and said this. Gong Yimo was shocked. She realized what she had just done and quickly pushed him away to sit up. At this moment, Gong Dai also took a step back at the right time. He was panting slightly. Just now, his rationality and physiology had been in an intense battle. On one hand, he wanted to satisfy his desire to eat her up. On the other hand, he wanted to wait until she was willing and the day when success would follow naturally. He didn't want her to hate him because of her unwillingness. He wanted everlasting love. Gong Yimo was afraid of her appearance just now. For a moment, she even hoped that Gong Dai would be more proactive. It was too scary. This was definitely not her. Could it be that she hadn't tasted a man for too long? Was she feeling empty? Both of them were trying to calm their hearts. So at this moment, both of them didn't speak. The air was still very hot, as if there was a string that was stretched taut. The slightest teasing would cause it to break. At this time, they couldn't withstand the slightest provocation. At this moment, there was a commotion in the distance. The door to the princess residence was forced open. Someone barged in and soon arrived at her courtyard. Gong Yimo, come out quickly. What happened just now? Upon hearing this voice, Gong Dai's eyes suddenly turned cold. When Gong Yimo heard that it was Shun Shiyi, she breathed a sigh of relief and hurriedly prepared to go out. It must have been a servant who went out to inform him. After all, Shun Shiyi's duty was to protect the imperial city. But she was held down by Gong Dai. Royal sister, you rest. I'll go. Gong Yimo looked at him. This wasn't good. No matter what, Shun Shiyi was worried about her and came over in the middle of the night. How could she not see him? But Gong Dai's expression softened. He lowered his head and licked her red and swollen lips. Do you want everyone to know what we just did? In? The word in made Gong Yimo's face burn. She hurriedly pushed Gong Dai away. Go. Go, I want to rest. Unexpectedly, as soon as she finished speaking, Gong Ju picked her up and carried her to the bed. Gong Yimo's heart jumped again. Moreover, Gong Dai also couldn't resist the temptation. He hugged her and kissed her again and again. It was rare for her to be so docile tonight. It must be the effect of the sachet. Gong Dai was prepared to wear this kind of sachet in the future. Gong Yimo saw that he still wanted to continue. She lightly bit her lower lip and pushed him. Shun Shiyi is still waiting. You, don't go too far. Unfortunately, her voice of resistance was like a kitten's. It was soft and tickling his heart unbearably. Gong Dai sighed. In the end, he kissed her forehead before going out. Once he left, Gong Yimo let out a long sigh of relief. She patted her burning face and spurned herself again in her heart. At this time, her rationality gradually returned. When she thought of what just happened, she wanted to go crazy. She clearly said that she would reject him. What exactly was she doing? Chapter 273. When Shun Shiyi saw Gong Dai come out of Gong Yimo's room, he was shocked. When the imperial guards he brought with him saw Gong Dai, they quickly knelt down, not daring to speak. Why are you here? Shun Shiyi frowned in dissatisfaction and glared at him. Where's Gong Yimo? Gong Dai smiled. Royal sister is resting. When Shun Shiyi heard this, he looked at him coldly. Realizing something, he waved his hand and dismissed everyone. When everyone left, he raised his eyebrows and asked in a low voice. She agreed to it? But he felt that it was impossible. How could Gong Yimo agree to such a thing? Gong Dai glanced at him indifferently. It's only a matter of time. Shun Shiyi was angry. Then everyone will have a chance. Why are you blocking the way? I want to see her. Ever since Gong Yimo came back from castration, he hadn't had a good talk with her. Although he didn't want to admit it, he missed her very much. Gong Dai sneered. You have a chance? He laughed at him for overestimating himself. Royal sister only treats you as an ordinary friend, so she's good to you. If you think that your relationship can go further because of this, then I can only say that you're delusional. When Shun Shiyi heard this, his hands clenched into fists. He glared at him. What right do you have to say that? How do you know that she doesn't like me? Are you her? Because if I don't want her to see you, she won't see you. Gong Dai's voice was cold. His tone was slow, but it was extremely hurtful. Because when she came back, the first person she saw was me, and not you. Shun Shiyi's face paled. He straightened his neck and retorted, That's because I left the capital before. Gong Dai laughed softly. That laughter was so mocking that it made Shun Shiyi's face turn white and red. His body was so tense that it trembled slightly. He was almost powerless to resist. He thought of Gong Yimo dancing for him. He thought of Gong Yimo killing people for him. She even gave him the gold medal bestowed by the emperor. Was all this just because he was a friend? He didn't believe that. Gong Yimo's feelings for him shouldn't be limited to this. He shouldn't have. Therefore, he mustered up his courage and shouted, "She can drink with me." Seeing that I was unhappy, he would make me happy and even save my life regardless of the consequences. She, royal sister, is willing to die for me. Gong Dai looked at him coldly and interrupted him mercilessly. Do you dare say that? As if all his strength had been sucked out, Shun Shi felt cold just standing there. You can't do it. You're her little brother, and there's only me. Only I can give her happiness openly. His words provoked Gong Dai, but Gong Dai only narrowed his eyes and cruelly told him the truth. Perhaps, but you won't have the chance. Yes, in Dayu State. He was the Prince of Qi whose words carried enormous weight. Even if Shen Shiyi inherited the throne in the end, how could he be a match for Gong Dai? For the first time, Shen Shiyi felt embarrassed and took 2 steps back. He didn't want to face him and wanted to run away. Wait. Gong Dai stopped him. In the night wind, Shun Shiyi's back paused, but he didn't look back. Huh, what else do you want? Gong Dai curled his lips slightly. I want you to hand over the gold medal that royal sister gave you. That doesn't belong to you. Shen Shiyi subconsciously covered his chest. No. This was the proof that Gong Yimo treated him well back then. It was the proof that they knew each other. This gold medal was the entirety of their relationship. However, Gong Dai approached him step by step. His steps were calm and his voice was like a ghost, echoing in his ears. Give it up. It's not yours. It's useless to force it. Being oppressed by Gong Dai and even wanting to take away his gold medal, Shun Shiyi felt humiliated and angry. However, he wasn't a match for Gong Dai. Thinking of this, his bright eyes dimmed. He didn't want Gong Dai to have an easy time, so he sneered. Aren't you also forcing it? He said coldly. What kind of person is Gong Yimo? She won't accept you. Aren't you going too far? At the end, he couldn't control his anger. Gong Dai had already walked behind him. The two of them were equally tall, but they seemed to be separated by the Milky Way. He lowered his voice. I'm forcing it because I can feel that I'm in her heart. Do you have the confidence? His tone was mocking, making Shun Shiyi feel like he was burning with anger. However, Gong Dai didn't seem to back down. His attitude was clear and domineering. Gong Yimo was his. Everything about her was his. Not only did he want to cut off these people's delusions, he also wanted to cut off their thoughts. If Shen Shiyi didn't hand it over, he didn't mind snatching it away. Shen Shiyi's back was facing him. He seemed to be thinking, but his shoulders kept trembling. He seemed to be enduring to the extreme. However, he wanted to resist, but he was afraid that once the matter was exposed, the one who would be hurt would be Gong Yimo. Gong Dai was right about one thing. Gong Yimo to him, perhaps she was just a friend. That was why she didn't come out, even if she couldn't sleep now. Thinking of this, he suddenly felt sad. It was really hurtful to be forced to see through this. His hand once again pressed against his chest. So, he was the only one who had been forcing himself all along? Ha ha ha. He, Shun Shiyi, didn't care. At this time, he took out the token. The bright color was very conspicuous under the moonlight. It was obviously often played with. Shen Shiyi had forgotten how many days and nights he missed Gong Yimo, but didn't know where to find her. He would hold this token and play with it. How many times, because of this token, he felt that he was different from others in Gong Yimo's heart. But, since she didn't care, what else was there for him to think about? So he turned around angrily and reached out to Gong Dai as if he had made up his mind. Isn't it just a token? His lips lost their color in an instant. His whole body trembled, but he was still trying to be brave. I don't care. Gong Ju reached out to grab the token, only to find that Gong Ju's grip was tight. But how could his strength be compared to Gong Ju's? No matter how hard he tried, Gong Ju's grip on the token was slowly being pulled away. The moment his hand was completely empty, Shun Shiyi felt that his heart was empty. He looked at the token and couldn't recover for a long time. Those things in the past, were they really in the past? Did she not exist? Was he daydreaming? His face darkened and he suddenly laughed, glaring fiercely at Gong Dai. Gong Dai, don't be complacent. Whether or not she will choose you is another matter. You. He coldly snorted. You won't be complacent forever. Because he had cut off a crooked peach blossom, Gong Dai was in a very good mood. You don't have to worry about it. Royal sister was mine when she was 7 years old. Shun Shi was hit again and again. He couldn't stand it anymore and turned to leave. As soon as he left the courtyard, he couldn't help but shout a few times. An imperial guard came forward and was kicked away by him. He was obviously very irritated and left with a murderous aura. But whether he was angry or shouting, he was still hurt. Unfortunately, Gong Dai didn't sympathize with him. He was an unscrupulous person. If someone didn't know what was good for them and wanted to steal his woman, he didn't mind being more ruthless. Chapter 274. The next day, Gong Yimo woke up with a pair of panda eyes. She still had a tough battle to fight today, but before she entered the palace, she wanted to see Huazhou Wuyo. Seeing that Huazhou Wuyo was about to go to Qi Manor, Gong Yimo was a little reluctant. She purposely waited until Gong Dai's morning court assembly before sneaking off to Qi Manor. Compared to the other princesses' grand procession, Gong Yimo's departure was rather low-key. Her martial prowess was high, so the Princess Manor's housekeeper naturally turned a blind eye and let her do as she pleased. Hence, she wore a scarf and headed to Qi Manor. However, before she could approach the entrance, she was stopped by 2 guards. What are you doing here? Gong Yimo lifted the veil of her scarf and smiled at them. Do I need to announce my entry? When the 2 guards saw that it was Gong Yimo, they hurriedly bowed. This subordinate did not know that the princess had arrived. This subordinate deserves to die. They then said, His Highness has instructed that no matter when, as long as you are here, you can directly enter without needing to seek permission from anyone. This subordinate will now bring you to Lord Bai. Gong Yimo nodded. Indeed, she needed Bai Sheng to lead the way. When Bai Sheng heard that Gong Yimo had arrived, he was first stunned before he became ecstatic. He hurriedly came out to welcome her. Gong Yimo did not beat around the bush and directly stated the purpose of her visit. Without another word, Bai Sheng brought her to Qi Manor's most mysterious dungeon, which was also Qi Manor's forbidden area. On the way, as Gong Yimo looked around, Bai Sheng told her about the things that had happened in the past few years. Qi Manor had changed a lot, and many places had been designed with ingenuity. It was even more comfortable to live in than her Princess Manor. However, there was a sentry every 5 steps and a guard every 10 steps. It made one feel that the atmosphere in the manor was very oppressive. Those solemn imperial guards gave off a somber feeling for no reason. Furthermore, throughout the entire manor, she did not see a single woman. Gong Dai. He was really different from her previous life. Soon, they arrived at the dungeon. This dungeon had only been built a few years ago and was set up under the fake mountain. Many people who were inconvenient to be locked up in Zhao prison would be moved here. It was very close to where Gong Dai lived. After going down, Gong Yimo felt a chill in the air. She had a hunch that many people had died here. Huazhou Wuyo was considered a very important person, so she was locked up in the innermost part of the dungeon. When Gong Yimo arrived, she was resting with her eyes closed and her legs crossed. It was as if this was not a dungeon, but an altar. As expected of Lu Ye's goddess, Gong Yimo thought of an idea and smiled wickedly. Huazhou Wuyo heard the sound and opened his eyes. The moment he saw Gong Yimo, his eyes flashed with hostility. It's you. She pursed her lips slightly. She was a little annoyed that she met Gong Yimo under such circumstances. She thought that she was much more noble than Gong Yimo. She was Lu Ye's only goddess, while Gong Yimo was just a pitiful princess who had been beaten to a commoner. Therefore, the moment they met should have been when Gong Yimo had failed in her restoration and was carrying an ominous name like a stray dog. At that time, Huazhou Wuyo would have helped her like a god, showing the difference between the two of them. Yes, although Huazhou Wuyo hated Gong Yimo, She also recognized Gong Yimo's talent and wanted to take her for her own use. Not now, when she was in the dungeon and at the mercy of others. What are you doing here? Hua Zhou Wuyo harumphed. She was arrogant. Even if she was now a prisoner, she did not have to worry because her cousin was now in Dayu state. She was not afraid of Gong Yimo. Gong Yimo walked in and smiled. I heard that you are very knowledgeable about the mysteries of heaven and earth. Then, did you predict that you would fall into my hands? Hua Zhou Wuyo pursed her lips. Her tricks were actually just a little knowledge of the weather and feng shui. It was not much at all. However, because her family had a high status in Luyi, and she knew how to run a business, she was regarded as a legend by the commoners. Seeing that Hua Zhou Wuyo did not answer, Gong Yimo was amused. She smiled, revealing her white teeth. Don't worry, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just here to ask, why did you attack me that day? Hua Zhou Wuyo harumphed and ignored her. Gong Yimo touched her chin and asked with a smile, do you think I'm a threat and want to get rid of me? However, when she thought about how Tsang Xiao had been stalling for time that day and did not kill her from the start, she said, or, do you want me to be unable to return to my position and be labeled as an inauspicious person? Then, you will attack me and make me work for you? She guessed the main point immediately. This made Hua Zhou Wuyo hate this woman even more. She stood up suddenly. So what if I am? So what if I'm not? She opened her eyes and looked at Gong Yimo. She realized that the other party was really beautiful. At this point, she couldn't help but feel jealous. No wonder. Last night, Gong Ju went to look for her and was willing to buy her snacks. He even stood by her side and patiently taught the boss how to roast them. She liked it even more. Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes slightly. She sensed that Hua Zhou Wuyo was suddenly angry and emotionally unstable. She laughed mischievously and looked very harmless. If you are, then let me continue to guess. The reason why your Hua Zhou family has such a high status in Luyi is because your family is the stable hand of the government. Almost half of Lu Ye's famous horses come from your family, right? Then, you came to look for me because of my relationship with the second prince of Yuheng? You want me to work for you and help you build a bridge so that Lu Yi and Yuheng can trade through the land route? I think this should be your cousin Long Chung Wuji's idea. Once your family succeeds, you will be able to gain a lot of benefits. But this matter should be done by your biological brother. You sneaked out, right? Hua Zhou Wuyo's pupils shrank, and she suddenly felt a little scared. She had never thought that a woman like Gong Yimo would have such a powerful vision and analytical ability. She had only eavesdropped on her brother and cousin's plan. That was why she sneaked out and planned it step by step. She wanted to make a contribution and share her cousin's burden. But Gong Yimo was an outsider. Without eavesdropping, she could actually guess their secret plans so clearly. It was really frightening. No matter how powerful Hua Zhou Wuyo was, in the end, she was just a goddess with limited vision. She was good at scheming and managing the harem, but when it came to the world, how could she compare to a little fox like Gong Yimo? It was not difficult to guess all these. The difficult part was to be open-minded. Seeing that Hua Zhou Wuyo was shocked and angry, Gong Yimo lowered her voice and asked at the right time. But from what I know, your family doesn't have many horses, right? 2 years ago, many of them died because of the plague. Now, I'm afraid they are not as good as Baiji's family. With such a big appetite, can you eat them all? Chapter 275. Her tone was slightly mocking. Such insulting words deeply agitated Hua Zhou Wuyo. What is Baiji's family? That plague has already passed for 2 years. We have already recovered our strength. She looked at Gong Yimo and lifted her chin slightly. Suddenly, she felt that Gong Yimo was just us. She didn't really know everything, but at this moment, she still didn't know that she had unintentionally revealed some terrible news. After all, she had limited knowledge and caused Dragon City Wuji to suffer heavy losses. After achieving her goal, Gong Yimo became very easy to talk to. She looked at Hua Zhou Wuyo and revealed her white teeth. Oh right, General Lu Yi is your biological brother, right? She chuckled and touched her shoulder. Back then, he shot me with an arrow and I almost died in the West Province. Now that you are in my hands, do you think I should take revenge on him through you? How dare you? Hua Zhou Wuyo sneered, her expression fearless. I am the future Princess Lu Yi. If you dare to touch me, my cousin won't let you off. The Hua Zhou family won't let you off either. What she said was the truth. Gong Yimo really didn't dare to do anything to her now, so she touched her nose and spread out her hands. I was just saying, look at how agitated you are. All right, if you don't want to see me, I'll leave, okay? With that, she really walked away. Hua Zhou Wuyo wanted to stop her, but she didn't forget that she was now a prisoner. She could only watch angrily as Gong Yimo walked away. Once Gong Yimo left, she was a little discouraged. She stomped her foot angrily and bit her lower lip. Back then, she only knew about Gong Yimo because her brother, Hua Zhou Jinyan, had told her. At that time, he had returned from Daiyu State and hurriedly went to look for his cousin. She had insisted on listening in. Only then did she know that Gong Yimo existed in this world. At that time, her brother had held Gong Yimo in high esteem. His expression was very serious and serious, as if this woman would become her cousin's rival. At that time, she was very unconvinced. She had seen a lot of women. What talented woman, what heavenly woman. They were all exaggerated because of some small things, and in the end, they were just undeserved titles. Although she didn't want to admit it, her identity as a goddess was deliberately packaged by her family, and she had worked hard to achieve it. It was all for the sake of marrying her cousin. Therefore, even after listening to her brother's stories about Gong Yimo, she still felt that Gong Yimo was just a brute. Perhaps she was smarter than other women and knew how to run a business better, but that was all there was to it. Especially when she heard that a woman like her could think of building canals and digging canals, she felt that it was even more ridiculous. She thought that there must be someone behind Gong Yimo to package him up, but it was too exaggerated. But this time, she saw Gong Yimo with her own eyes. Although she didn't want to admit it, she realized that she couldn't see through Gong Yimo's thoughts at all. On the contrary, Gong Yimo could easily see through her thoughts. This made her very annoyed. Her thoughts couldn't help but be self-satisfied, and she once again thought of the incident last night. She saw Gong Dai, such a scary man, walk into a dessert shop with everyone kneeling down to welcome him. The boss and lady boss, who had been waiting there for a long time, were so scared that they were trembling. At that time, no one dared to speak, and Gong Dai asked the boss what to do in this extremely oppressive atmosphere. He said, "More sugar." The boss didn't dare to disobey, and quickly did as he was told. He said, "Burn both sides a little." The boss wiped his sweat and didn't dare to refute. As for her, because she was afraid that she would run away, Gong Dai also brought her along when they got out of the car. Therefore, she was lucky enough to witness this scene. Looking at the little old man's attitude of making desserts, as if he was worshipping his ancestors, she didn't know why, but this contrast suddenly made her impression of Gong Dai better. She even felt like laughing at how a man like him still wanted to eat desserts in the middle of the night. Who knew that he wasn't eating for himself? When she thought about the whole story and the direction they were going, Hua Zhou Wuyo suddenly felt very uncomfortable in her heart. Gong Dai's unique gentleness was it because of a woman? She didn't admit that she was jealous because she already had a cousin, but she still felt very uncomfortable in her heart. And when she first saw Gong Yimo today, she thought to herself, other than her face, she was just, She even felt that for Gong Yimo to have such achievements, Gong Dai must have put in a lot of effort. She was really skilled to be able to conquer a man like Gong Dai. Unknowingly, Gong Yimo gradually became the image of a scheming fox in her heart. The next day, Daiyu State Palace. Emperor Gong was very surprised. Who did you say came? King Lu Yi? Why did he suddenly come to visit if he didn't stay in Lu Yi? When he heard that King Lu Yi came, Emperor Gong couldn't help but put aside the assassination attempt at the princess residence last night. After all, that was the boy pet he chose. If there was a problem, he couldn't absolve himself from the blame. But now, Lu Ye's visit was even more urgent. So after a series of preparations, Emperor Gong personally hosted a banquet to entertain King Lu Yi. Emperor Gong was also a smart person. He faintly felt that King Lu Yi came here for the cooperation of the bank. After all, Lu Ye's grain production was low. If they could really do business, for them, it would be disrespectful. So Emperor Gong didn't invite many people to be present to show respect. In the magnificent hall, there was singing and dancing. Emperor Gong noticed that King Lu Yi didn't bring many people with him this time. It gave people the feeling that he came in a hurry. This made him even more suspicious. Did something happen to Lu Yi? King Lu Yi wore a silver mask on his face. It was said that his face was disfigured, so even in Lu Yi, there were very few people who had seen his true face. So the more he thought about it, the more he couldn't figure out how Gong Yimo knew him. But this wasn't important. Winner takes all. Now he just wanted to solve the problem. At this time, he looked around and asked with a smile and a deep voice, "May I ask Dayu State's monarch?" When this king entered the capital, he heard countless rumors. They said that a princess of Dayu State had been restored and the heavens had blessed her. This king was very curious and wanted to meet her. Emperor Gong hesitated. It was obvious that King Lu Yi came here to discuss national affairs. How could there be a woman present? But then he thought about it. Didn't he already decide to treat Immerse as his son? He really had a devil in his heart. But why was King Lu Yi so interested in Immerse? But he didn't think about this first. He directly waved his hand. Summon the eldest princess to the banquet. Summon the eldest princess to the banquet. The sound of the singing spread far and wide. At this time, Emperor Gong also directly waved away the singing and dancing. He and King Lu Yi talked about business. Emperor Gong toasted a cup of wine to launching Wuji. His eyes were bright and spirited as he laughed loudly. It's the end of the year. King Lu Yi suddenly came to visit. This made me puzzled. King Lu Yi, please enlighten me. Chapter 276. Longqing Wuji returned a smile. Although he was sitting below, his domineering aura was no less intimidating than Gong Cheng's. This made Gong Cheng sigh with emotion. This world will soon be the world of these young people. This prince is here for official business, and it's an important matter. I heard that Dayu State intends to trade with Yuheng, and to unify the banknotes with the banks? King Lu Yi went straight to the point, and the emperor naturally didn't shirk away. That's right. Now that the four countries are at peace, why should we close the country? If we want to develop, we can only take the advantages of others and make up for our own shortcomings. First, we can promote the integration between countries and reduce friction. Second, we hope that the common people can live a better life. These words were said by Gong Yimo to persuade him to open the country's door. Although the meaning was shallow and the reasoning was straightforward, if he really did it, not only would it be a political achievement that would be passed down through the ages, but it would also be a great development step. Although it required courage, Gong Cheng was old at heart, so he wasn't afraid of this little risk. In the end, it was because Gong Yimo had firearms in her hands. Once a war broke out, she wouldn't ignore it. This might be the source of Gong Cheng's courage to open the country's door. Dayu State's monarch is really far-sighted. This prince admires his vision. Longqing Wuji flattered first, then said, "This prince will not beat around the bush. This time, I came with sincerity to represent Lu Yi and cooperate with Dayu State. Whether it's the cooperation with the banks or the trade between the two countries, this prince is very much looking forward to it." His sincerity was to condone his fiancée's attempt to ruin the royal sister's coronation ceremony. Below, Gong Dai listened coldly and smiled without saying a word. Gong Cheng was slightly surprised, then smiled. "This is a big matter. I wonder if King Lu Yi would like to discuss it in private?" Longqing Wuji looked at the people present. There weren't many. No need. This is a good thing. When his gaze fell on Gong Dai, he slightly narrowed his eyes. It's better to get this done quickly. Emperor Gong couldn't help but give him a toast and said with a smile, "In that case, I would like to know, how does Lu Yi want to cooperate?" He concealed the shrewdness in his eyes and asked for guidance. Back then, the reason why Dayu State and Yuheng cooperated so quickly was because of the contract in Immerse's hands. It allowed Dayu State to be in an invincible position. But Lu Yi? If it was just an equal cooperation, he was very worried that the other party would fall out with him one day. Longqing Wuji smiled. Of course, it's an equal cooperation. Lu Yi and Dai Yu State are exchanging what they need and unifying the banknotes. Emperor Gong's expression froze, and after a long time, he smiled deeply. Everyone present is my confidant, so I will speak frankly. After all, there is yuheng between Lu Yi and Dai Yu State. If this kind of cooperation changes too much, I will feel very uneasy. After all, I'm old and my thoughts are heavy. I'm not as courageous as you young people. Longqing Wuji smiled very graciously. Of course, we came in a hurry with sincerity. If Dai Yu State's monarch agrees, this prince is willing to marry my sister to Dai Yu State and make the two countries happy. When Emperor Gong heard this, he really felt that Lu Yi was sincere. After all, Lu Ye's people paid attention to bloodline. Princesses and other nobles would only marry among the upper echelons. But something was still missing. A princess was not enough to make him make up his mind. Longqing Wuji said again, I don't know if the Dai Yu State's monarch has any other requests. You can bring it up, and we can have a good talk. He kicked the question back, making it difficult for Emperor Gong. He subconsciously glanced at Gong Dai, and Gong Dai continued. It's not difficult to make a deal. This son has a proposal, but I don't know if I should say it. Emperor Gong hurriedly said, There's no harm in saying it. Gong Dai smiled lightly. All the money is stored in the bank, and we have to pay interest. So if Lu Yi can agree that in the future, when the two countries trade, Lu Ye's people will withdraw money from Dai Yu State, and Dai Yu State won't have to pay interest, then the cooperation can be expected. Longqing Wuji's eyes darkened, and with a deep anger, he sneered at Gong Dai. If that's the case, your Dai Yu State really has no sincerity in cooperating. Gong Dai looked at him with a wine cup in his hand and smiled coldly. Does King Lu Yi not know if there is sincerity or not? If you agree to this condition, perhaps there will be an additional surprise? Longqing Wuji knew that he was referring to Hua Zhou Wuyo. He actually dared to threaten him? Emperor Gong looked on coldly. One side had a fiery aura, but was suppressing the boiling lava. The other side was as cold as ice, but seemed to have victory in his grasp. He didn't say anything. It wasn't good for him to intervene in this young man's matter. Gong Dai put down his wine cup and said lightly, You might as well consider it. Who told Longqing Wuji to climb into the royal sister's bed last night? Then he should be prepared to be forced by him. One must know that he didn't want to make such an excessive request. Longqing Wuji waved his hand. Let's wait for your country's eldest princess to come. This prince needs to think about this matter carefully. He thought that even if Gong Yimo wasn't easy to deal with, she wouldn't make such a rude request. Was she forcing him, Lu Yi, to be inferior to her? So he might as well talk to her. If they reached an agreement, presumably Gong Dai wouldn't be able to say anything. At this time, a sweet-sounding laughter was heard. Are you guys talking about me? Longqing Wuji looked over, but for some reason, his pupils shrank, and his thin lips were tightly pursed. Gong Yimo was wearing a dark black palace dress, striding over, like 100 flowers blooming. She was instantly eye-catching. There were large red flowers on the black skirt, like a fire blooming in the dark, which made her skin look as white as jade. Her collar and sleeves were embroidered with totems with golden threads, which were thick and luxurious, and had an indescribable sense of beauty. At this time, she only had a golden crown on her head, and her fine black hair was half tied up, half draped over her shoulders, beautiful and heroic. Gong Dai saw Gong Yimo winking at him, and for some reason, his heart was beating fast. She rarely dressed herself up, but when she dressed up, it actually made Gong Dai, who had been calm for a long time, feel his heart skip a beat. He looked straight at that aggressive beauty and fell head over heels for it time and time again. Gong Yimo bowed to the emperor, and then to King Lu Yi, with an extraordinary bearing, and revealed a smile. I heard that Lu Yi wants to cooperate with Dai Yu State. This is a good thing. This consort is not talented, but it just so happens that this consort is the initiator of this matter. If King Lu Yi has something to discuss, Why not discuss it with this consort? King Luyi wanted to laugh for no reason. This woman was really different. Yesterday, she dared to press him down on the chair and do those embarrassing things. But today, she could pretend not to know him and only talk about business without talking about romance. This prince came with sincerity, but your country doesn't seem to appreciate it. Oh. Gong Yimo blinked. I'd like to hear the details. King Luyi stared at her, his blue to purple eyes carrying a trace of a smile. This prince is willing to marry my younger sister to Dayu State to facilitate the reconciliation between the two countries. However, your country's prince said that when Lu Ye's citizens withdraw money from Dayu State, they have to give up the interest they should receive. Isn't such an unfair agreement humiliating? If he really agreed, once he returned to the country, he would be cursed by Lu Ye's citizens. Chapter 277. Gong Yimo glanced at Gong Dai and smiled. This agreement is unreasonable. The moment she said that, the ministers and the emperor all stared at her as if they didn't believe that she would speak up for an outsider. King Luyi smiled. Princess is still the most reasonable one. Was he implying that the others were not sensible? Gong Yimo rubbed her chin and said calmly, transactions between two countries should be equal. This consort is only helping reason and not kinship. As soon as her words came out, many of the people present took a deep breath and showed a look of disapproval. The emperor frowned, unsure of what Gong Yimo was planning to do in the end. At this moment, she winked at Longqing Wuji. Does King Luyi agree with this consort's words? Longqing Wuji thought carefully and didn't find any loopholes. He nodded. Of course I agree. When Gong Yimo heard that, she smiled, revealing her white teeth. King Luyi is indeed generous. However, let's put this cooperation aside for now and talk about these war horses. How many are you willing to export in a year? War horses? Longqing Wuji's expression darkened. What does princess mean? Lu Ye's war horses are not allowed to be bought or sold. This is the iron law of Lu Ye's dynasty. Gong Yimo finally revealed her fangs and quickly followed up. In other words, King Luyi keeps on talking about a fair cooperation, but in the end, he wants to keep it to himself? Longqing Wuji's expression darkened. It was extremely ugly. Since he had already said it, it would be embarrassing if he changed his words. He thought of an excuse and said, Princess might not know, but other than the iron law set by the ancestors, Luyi had an outbreak of plague 2 years ago and all the horse farms were affected. Luyi was too busy to take care of himself, so he couldn't say anything. Gong Yimo raised her brows. Is that so? Her white finger pointed at her forehead. But why did this consort hear that Hua Zhou's family has already recovered? Longqing Wuji suddenly gritted his teeth, wishing he could strangle Hua Zhou Wuyo to death. There's no such thing. Princess, please don't be biased. Gong Yimo laughed. Whether or not this consort is biased, this consort doesn't know. But this consort has heard that Luyi wants to open up a path with Yuheng. It can be seen that King Luyi is being modest. There are still many horses in your country. Otherwise, how could you casually support a passage? She even knew about this. Longqing Wuji was a little surprised and believed that it must have been Flower Boat Wuyo who told him the secret. Otherwise, Gong Yimo would not have known about these secrets. Thinking of this, he was even more dissatisfied with Huazhou Wuyo. But at this moment, it was useless to be dissatisfied. He had no way to back down. If he said that her information was fake, then wouldn't he be slapping himself in the face when the passage was opened? He had to think carefully about this matter. However, Gong Yimo would not give him the chance to calm down. She took a few steps towards him and said aggressively, As for the iron law of our ancestors, King Lu Ye's vision needs to keep up with the times. Right now, the 4 countries are at peace, and opening up the country to trade is a good thing. We've already done this much, so why do you insist on sticking to the old law? Furthermore, you said that you came with sincerity. This consort believes you because this consort knows that you really did bring a noble daughter. Longqing Wuji suppressed his anger and said, She's not. Not? Gong Yimo suddenly interrupted him with a smile. King Luyi, Don't joke around. You said that you wanted to marry your sister to Dai State, so you came with sincerity. How could you not bring the princess with you? She was clearly threatening him. If he did not agree to sell horses, then she had the ability to marry Flowerboat Wuyo to Dai State. When that time came, the great King Lu Yi would sell his fiancée for a partnership. Let's see how he would explain it. Longqing Wuji really wanted to stop her chattering little mouth at this moment. She was just a woman, so why was she more aggressive than the countless warriors on the battlefield? He had underestimated her. He always thought that Gong Yimo's every step was guided by Gong Dai, but now he finally realized. So Gong Yimo was the one guiding him. He had to take Flowerboat Wuyo with him, but he could not change his words. He either agreed to Gong Yimo's request or agreed to Gong Dai's request. However, he was extremely unwilling to do either of them. When had he ever made a losing deal in his life? Gong Yimo saw that there was a thin layer of sweat on his forehead, so she relaxed her tone and spoke softly. King Lu Yi is sincere, so my Dai State naturally will not be stingy. I heard that Lu Yi and Yu Heng have not finished discussing the details of the horse path. This consort is not talented, but this consort has a few ideas. You should know that the canals in Dai State were all this consort's ideas. A horse path is not difficult. As for the choice, I hope that King Lu Yi can be decisive. This consort's patience is limited, and I don't like to haggle over every ounce. Her words were like a slap and a sweet date, and it even contained a hidden threat. However, the ideas she mentioned were exactly what the King of Lu Yi desperately needed right now. At this time, he had already acknowledged Gong Yimo's talent. After all, the effects of the canals were right in front of him, and Lu Yi had also started to try them out. So even though he was unwilling, he could only admit defeat. Gong Yimo was too powerful. If he made a mistake, he would lose the whole game. If he continued to argue, he was afraid that the result would be the same. So he gritted his teeth and raised his cup. All right. This consort wishes the two countries a happy cooperation. Soon, a palace servant served wine. Gong Yimo held the cup with her jade fingers and calmly saluted him. As for the details, this consort, as a woman, will not participate. I believe that King Lu Yi also has an idea about the number of warhorses to be exported. If the cooperation in the end is happy, this consort does not mind giving a farewell gift as a gift. She meant that if he asked for too little and she was not satisfied, she might not return Huazhou Wuyo to him. Longqing Wuji looked at her again and gnashed his teeth. He wanted to give her a few whips, but he could only smile. This consort will thank you in advance. Gong Yimo smiled when she heard this. She drank the wine and smiled proudly at Gong Cheng. Gong Cheng also did not expect that Gong Yimo would be so powerful. Her methods and intelligence did not lose to any of his sons. It was a pity that she was a girl. After that, things went smoothly. Moreover, Gong Yimo did not have anything to do. She was happy to be free. A few days later, when they sent off Lu Yi and the others, Huazhou Wuyo followed behind King Lu Yi dispiritedly. It was obvious that he was scolded harshly by him. Gong Dai rode on a horse and sent them to the city gate. Longqing Wuji also rode on a horse. He was very disappointed when he did not see Gong Yimo's figure. But it did not matter. Although he lost this time, next time, he would definitely make Gong Yimo look good. And Gong Dai, he had prepared a big gift for him. Many thanks for Dai State's hospitality. This trip was too rushed, so my sister did not come along. In a few days, Lu Yi will marry the princess with a big gift. Together, the two countries will be happy. Gong Dai looked at him coldly. Farewell, King Lu Yi. Farewell. Longqing Wuji angrily turned around, and the group quickly left. He wanted to see if Gong Dai could still be so calm after knowing the details of the cooperation. Chapter 278. The palace was decorated with lanterns and colored banners because the crown prince was coming back. Gong Yimo was a little conflicted. So much time had passed. If her brother still hadn't let go of his obsession with her, how awkward would it be for them to see each other all the time? But even if it was awkward, what would come would come. She went to the palace with a trace of luck in her heart. Seeing Gong Yimo arrive, Emperor Cheng hurriedly waved at her from the imperial study. Imo, come and take a look. Father, why are you looking for me in such a hurry? Gong Yimo walked over with a smile. She saw that he was holding an exquisite portrait in his hand. Looking at the dress, it wasn't a woman from Dayu State, but she looked somewhat familiar. This is? Gong Yimo subconsciously looked at the handwriting under the portrait. Princess Lu Yi? She raised her eyebrows slightly. She didn't expect that Longqing Wuji would marry her to Dayu State. That was Lu Ye's most honorable little princess. Emperor Cheng smiled with satisfaction. This woman's status is honorable, and she is quite favored. It's just that I have a headache. Who should I marry her to? His words made Gong Yimo's face pale for some reason. The crown prince. But he's going to marry the Su family's daughter in a few days. The other princes have already married. It's really hard to choose. He said this, then glanced at Gong Yimo's expression. Gong Yimo naturally knew what he meant. Father, you want to marry this woman to Gong Dai? Emperor Cheng smiled and nodded. You still understand my thoughts. Speaking of this, he sighed again. But Gong Dai, that stinking brat, is too insensible. I told him about this matter, but he said that he's still young and doesn't have the heart to marry. But he doesn't look at how old he is. When I was his age, I already had 4 sons. Gong Yimo couldn't help but smile bitterly. She didn't expect that Gong Dai, who had always been a young man in her heart, had unknowingly grown up. In ancient times, he had also reached the age of late marriage. Since Gong Dai has already rejected her, he probably doesn't have any feelings for her. Father, why did you call me here? She pretended not to know. Gong Cheng glared at her. Don't play dumb. That stinky brat is getting more and more disobedient. You're the only one who might listen to your words. You're the elder sister. Don't you care about your younger brother's marriage? He was afraid that it would be fine if she didn't care, but once she did, she would get herself into trouble. At this moment, Gong Cheng suddenly sighed. We know that the two of you have a good relationship. It's not much worse than siblings from the same mother, but we've been hearing some rumors these past few years. Gong Yimo suddenly looked at him, causing him to wave his hands repeatedly. Don't worry, Imperial Father isn't such a foolish person. You and Gong Dai are both smart children. How could you do something unwise? It's just that, since you said that you won't marry for the rest of your life, Gong Dai can't possibly not marry for the rest of his life, right? Wouldn't that be confirming the rumors? Gong Yimo carefully discerned Gong Cheng's expression. She wanted to see if he really trusted her, or if he was using this matter to test her. Gong Cheng actually felt a little uncomfortable being stared at by Gong Yimo like this. When Gong Yimo wasn't smiling, her eyes were very intimidating. Generally, those who weren't strong-willed wouldn't dare to look her in the eyes. Imperial Father wants me to persuade Gong Dai to marry a wife? Her voice was deep and slow, with a hint of a smile that could not be understood. Gong Cheng slightly raised his eyebrows. Why not? The eldest sister is like a mother. You've been taking care of him since he was young. How could he not listen to you? Gong Yimo chuckled. Suddenly, she felt a trace of pain in her heart. When she chose to become the princess of Dayu State, she didn't expect that there would be such a day, but she couldn't find any reason to refute. In terms of family background, Lu Yi was the youngest and most favored princess. She was more than enough to be a match for Gong Dai. In terms of appearance, talent, and temperament, the princess she met in her previous life could be said to be worthy of her reputation. Moreover, Gong Dai had also reached the age of marriage. At this time, she really couldn't find a reason to refute the emperor. Moreover, why should she refute? Could it be that she really wants Gong Dai to not marry for the rest of his life? Can she still respond to him? Imperial Father, this woman is naturally very good. Gong Yimo was a little confused about what she was saying. Her head was dizzy. This matter, I will mention it to Gong Dai. As for whether he agrees or not, it's really not something I can control. Hearing this, Gong Cheng laughed and patted her on the shoulder. Don't worry, your words are much more useful than Zhan's. Gong Yimo smiled faintly and bitterly. When she finally walked out of Zhaoyang Hall in a daze, she suddenly shivered. At this time, The Empress actually sent someone to find her. Gong Yimo was already distracted and was pulled to Fengqi Palace in a daze. At this time, Fengqi Palace was very lively. It turned out that the Empress held a small tea party and invited many officials' wives and daughters. The atmosphere was just right. Seeing so many people, Gong Yimo's spirit was lifted. She didn't think about those messy things and strode in. Feng Gue Rong Ji Gu states eldest princess has arrived. When her title came out, everyone present was stunned and then quickly got up to salute. Gong Yimo, why did she come here? When the Empress saw Gong Yimo, she was very happy to take her hand and said angrily, "You've been back for so long, but you haven't come to see Imperial Mother. Immerse, you're really biased." Gong Yimo was guided to the seat of honor on the left by the Empress and sat down. She then toasted the Empress with a cup of wine and smiled apologetically. "Imperial Mother is right. Akin will punish myself with 3 cups of wine to express my apology." As she spoke, she really drank 3 cups of wine in a row. Who was the Empress? At a glance, she could tell that Gong Yimo was in a bad mood, so she easily bypassed her and introduced her to her. You rarely attend these women's banquets since you were young. You probably don't know your crown prince brother's future in-laws, right?" She joked, then pointed to the first lady on the right and said, "This is the wife of the Duke Jean, a first-rank, titled honorary madam, and next to her is your future sister-in-law, Marquis Jean's legitimate daughter, Su Miaolan." Gong Yimo then turned her attention to the seat directly opposite and saw Su Miaolan for the second time. The Duke Jean's wife, Madame Zhang, hurriedly stood up and bowed to Gong Yimo. Because of Gong Yimo's status, it was far from what people like them could hope to reach. Akin greets eldest princess. "This is my daughter. She was young back then. If my daughter has offended you in any way, I hope princess will be magnanimous enough to forgive her." Was she talking about what happened at the tea party back then? Gong Yimo raised the teacup with one hand and smiled without saying a word. She directly looked at Su Miaolan, who had been avoiding her from the start. Su Miaolan was tugged by her mother, but she also took into account the situation. She gritted her teeth and obediently bowed. Akin greets eldest princess. At this moment, her mother tugged at her from behind again, causing Su Miaolan to suppress the resentment in her heart and speak in a low voice. Akin was muddle-headed at that time. "I hope princess won't blame me." After speaking, she lowered her head, clearly enduring silently. She was the future crown prince consort. In the future, when Gong Yimo saw her, she would have to respectfully call her sister-in-law. She didn't believe that Gong Yimo would bite her and not let go. But now, she had no choice but to lower her head. Because Gong Yimo's status was high, even her father could only bow to her. As expected, Gong Yimo didn't haggle over anything. She held the teacup and smiled faintly. "No need to be so courteous. Everything that happened in the past, Ben Gong has long forgotten." She was speaking the truth. This kind of small matter wasn't worthy of her jealousy. The Empress smiled and said, "Moer is still the most sensible." As she spoke, she even glared at the Duke Jean's wife. "You're just too careful. How could a Moer be that kind of woman who haggles over every little thing?" The Duke Jean's wife nodded repeatedly, praising Gong Yimo as if it didn't cost money. The other madams also chimed in, praising Gong Yimo to the heavens. Gong Yimo put down the teacup and picked up the wine cup again. She took a sip and didn't know why, but she suddenly felt like laughing. Just a moment ago, the Emperor was afraid that those rumors would come true and wanted her to act as a matchmaker for Gong Dai. The next moment, the Empress was afraid that Gong Che still had feelings for her when he returned, so she hurriedly shoved her daughter-in-law to her. Were they all afraid that she would harm their son? How interesting. Chapter 279. The more she thought about it, the more she found it interesting. She drank one cup after another. God knows, when she was reincarnated, she really didn't want to have any emotional involvement. She didn't know why things had turned out this way, and why these two people liked her. Therefore, she waved her hand and everyone quieted down. Finally, she could have some peace and quiet. Everyone thought she had something to say, so they listened attentively. Gong Yimo just raised her eyes and said lightly, "Lower your voices, I'm a little tired." When she said this, everyone's face turned ugly. Even the Empress felt that Gong Yimo was dissatisfied with her way of doing things, so she gave her some face. But what could she do? She had told her son before, and if her son listened to her, she wouldn't have to do this. But she was the one who invited them, and she couldn't say that Gong Yimo was tired, so she was in a difficult position. At this time, a very perceptive woman said, "That's right, the princess is still young, so she definitely doesn't like us women talking about our daily lives. Why don't we perform? The ladies here are all talented, so we should show them to Her Highness. In the future, we hope that Her Highness will choose a good husband." The Empress subconsciously looked at Gong Yimo, but seeing that she didn't react, she nodded and smiled. "Then I'm blessed. I wonder what the ladies have been learning at home?" She asked this, and there were many voices that agreed. In the end, she was the Empress, and to be honest, even Lucien Fei and the other concubines had to avoid her. The only one who could make the Empress so passive was Gong Yimo. This made the Empress, who had been living a smooth life for several years, a little angry. But she couldn't do anything to Gong Yimo. She didn't have any way to control Gong Yimo. The first to come out was the daughter of the Qin family, Qin Kuer. She was 18 years old, and should have been married long ago, but she was too outstanding and picky, so the marriage was delayed until now. So, she was probably the oldest lady present, aside from Su Miaolon. She bowed to the Empress, and then to Gong Yimo. "This subject's daughter has embarrassed herself. May your Highness please lend me the zither." The Empress smiled and waved her hand. She said to the palace maid, "Go, bring me the phoenix gourd." Yes. The eunuchs moved quickly. Gong Yimo watched coldly from the side. After Qin Kuer tested the notes, she began to play. The melodious sound of the zither rang out. On a winter day like this, it sounded a little lonely. It was probably similar to her current mood. Gong Yimo suddenly thought that if Gong Dai really wanted to marry, Qin Kuer would be a good choice. At least she wasn't a strong person. Compared to that scheming little princess, she was much better. As she thought of this, she continued to drink. The alcohol, which had no alcohol content, seemed to be making her drunk. One performance ended, and another began. There weren't many people present, so these ladies were bold enough to show their best sides. The Empress would occasionally comment, and the atmosphere gradually livened up. At this time, a lady's performance of the flute received unanimous praise. The Empress also praised her and gave her many rewards. After receiving the praise and rewards, she didn't go down. Instead, she bowed to Gong Yimo and said, "This subject's daughter's skills are insignificant and can't be considered elegant. If we really want to talk about it, Your Highness is the role model that I admire. I wonder if we have the honor of appreciating Your Highness' talent today?" Her words caused the Empress' expression to stiffen. Even her mother's expression changed in an instant. "Chang'er, don't mess around." Then she hurriedly stood up and apologized to Gong Yimo. "Please forgive me, Your Highness. My younger daughter doesn't know any better. Please forgive her." Gong Yimo was immediately called out, and her gaze fell on the lady on the stage. Before she could speak, Su Miaolon suddenly smiled and interrupted. "It's no wonder that younger sister Su is curious. Us sisters often say in private that Your Highness is the role model for us noble ladies to follow. We just don't know what kind of talents Your Highness has. As long as Your Highness shows a little bit of it, it will definitely be popular in the city, and everyone will fight to imitate you." Her words seemed to be praise, but who didn't know that Gong Yimo was born in the Cold Palace? Other than not knowing where she learned martial arts, in many people's eyes, she might have many wonderful ideas, but it was very likely that she was illiterate. And the industries that she established were naturally infinitely weakened in the eyes of women who cared about the harem. They thought that those men were looking for novelty and praised her too much. The Marchioness really wanted to sigh. She really didn't understand why her daughter was so stubborn. Could it be that she wanted to see Gong Yimo make a fool of herself? But Su Miaolon was stubborn. She was going to be the crown princess soon. Why should she be inferior to Gong Yimo? She didn't believe that the empress wouldn't help her. Gong Yimo smiled. She didn't answer her question and directly asked a question of her own. I heard that Miss Su's dancing skills are graceful. Would this consort have the fortune to see it? Gong Yimo's words caused Su Miaolan's expression to stiffen. This subject is talking about. You're not willing? Gong Yimo directly interrupted her domineeringly, slightly raising her brows. At this time, she was sitting on the couch, one hand supporting her chin as she lazily asked, "Are you not willing to perform for this consort, or are you not willing to perform for Imperial Mother?" Su Miaolan hurriedly got up and kneeled in front of the Empress. This subject absolutely doesn't have that thought. The Empress sneered, not denying it. Gong Yimo clearly wasn't a person who was easy to talk to, but Su Miaolan wanted to hit the muzzle of the gun in a moment of anger. Then, the Empress had nothing to say. She couldn't let Gong Yimo lose face for Su Miaolan. Since Miaolan has the heart, then let's do it. This consort's eyes are blessed. Su Miaolan raised her head in astonishment. She clearly wanted to embarrass Gong Yimo, but she didn't expect that her future mother-in-law wouldn't side with her at all. In the end, her horizons were limited. She didn't understand what kind of status a title bestowed by the emperor with a wave of his hand was equivalent to. Or, it could be said that she thought too highly of herself. She had no choice but to dance this dance. However, if she didn't dance well, it would be an undeserved reputation. If she danced well, it would be like she was a performer trying to win a smile from a superior. She couldn't help but feel even more resentful. Could it be that she couldn't compare to Gong Yimo even after becoming the crown princess? The music started. Even if she was unwilling, she had no choice but to dance. At this time, all the Furins present quieted down, afraid that they would touch Gong Yimo's reverse scale. The Empress's attitude raised their understanding of Gong Yimo's status by a level. She was someone who could defeat the crown princess with a single word. At this time, someone whispered something into the Empress's ear. The originally gloomy Empress's eyes lit up when she heard this. She immediately stood up. The moment she stood up, a man's laughter came from afar. "Imperial Mother, are you surprised?" Che, Gong Che had actually returned in advance, and had even come in secret to give her a huge surprise. Even Gong Yimo was slightly dazed as she looked towards the door. It was indeed him, Gong Che. He was now 21 years old and had completely shed his youthful immaturity. Now, he was successful and famous. His status was stable, and his temperament was restrained. His appearance was even more handsome. He was like a beautiful jade that made people gasp in admiration. Chapter 280. Gong Che. Gong Yimo couldn't describe what she was feeling. She only felt that this scene seemed to overlap with her previous life. This kind of winter banquet, this kind of scene. She actually preferred men like Gong Che, who was as gentle as jade. That was why she had been so desperate when she saw him in her previous life. However, he had also taught her a lesson, and that was that wishful thinking on one's part would not keep someone. That was why she had ended up in such a state, and had made such a vow. Gong Che's gaze almost immediately fell on Gong Yimo. Only he could understand the intense collision at that moment. He concealed the deep passion and desire in his eyes. With just one glance, he didn't dare to look again and looked directly at the Empress. "Mother, it's been so many years since we last met. This child is unfilial." As he spoke, he knelt down in front of the Empress. At this moment, everyone present seemed to have woken up from a dream and knelt down in front of the crown prince. The Empress' eyes were filled with hot tears as she personally helped him up and said in a choked voice, "It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. Now that you're back, don't leave again." Gong Che also said with emotion, "I won't leave. In the future, this son will always serve Mother and won't travel far." "Good, good." The Empress nodded repeatedly. Then she thought of something and asked, "Your Majesty, did you go?" Gong Che patted her hand and comforted her, "Mother, don't worry. Father knows. After comforting the Empress, he turned around. His black robes fluttered as he smiled at the crowd behind him. Since it's a palace banquet, there's no need to be so courteous. Rise. His voice was still as gentle as before, but now, he was no longer the crown prince who was in a precarious position. Thank you, Crown Prince. Only then did the crowd stand up. Many of the braver girls secretly peeked at Gong Chei's face. With one look, they were stunned and envious of Su Miaolan's good luck. Gong Chei's entire person was really different. It was as if a stone surface had been broken and a beautiful jade had been carved. His entire person's temperament seemed to have risen to another level, slowly revealing his inner beauty to the world. Her ink-black hair was only held up by a jade hairpin. She wore a black robe with a belt that was lightly tied up, making her appear slender and graceful. He was dressed very casually, but it didn't give people the feeling that his clothes were untidy. They only felt that his dressing was very suitable, and it gave people a feeling of extreme simplicity. His exquisite brows revealed some gentleness, and his entire being was like a gentle breeze, completely revealing his unique elegance. While everyone was looking at him, he was looking at Gong Yimo. At this moment, Gong Yimo stood up and smiled at him with a wine glass in her hand. Brother Crown Prince, we meet again. When Gong Yimo smiled, that overbearing beauty was instantly diluted by an aura that encompassed all things. People could only marvel at her beauty and elegance, but did not feel threatened in the slightest. But at this moment, there was a trace of bitterness and sorrow in her smile. For a moment, she wished that they had never grown up. Gong Chei was captivated by her smile, and his heart was once again filled with unbearable turbulence. His amour had grown up, and it was just as he had expected. She was gorgeous, calm, and elegant. How regretful he was that he couldn't witness her growth, and how happy he was for her growth. Amour. His voice seemed to be on the tip of his tongue, and in that moment, it was so gentle that it seemed to have substance. But his fingers formed a deep imprint in his palm. He didn't show it on his face, but only the heavens knew how hard it was for him to endure. He took a deep breath, and after a while, he revealed a seemingly carefree smile. At this moment, he received a cup of wine from a servant and raised it to Gong Yimo. After not seeing you for so many years, Amour has grown up. His eyelashes trembled, hiding the emotions in his eyes. He forced himself to look away. When I was young, if I did anything wrong, I hope that Imperial Sister will be magnanimous enough to forgive me. This cup is a toast to you. Let everything in the past be in the past. Congratulations on your return. After he finished speaking, he raised his head and drank the wine. Gong Yimo was slightly startled, but after a while, she revealed a smile. It's good that Crown Prince Gige has thought it through. A toast to you. Welcome back to the capital. After saying that, she raised her head and drank the wine. When she raised her head, her snow-white neck rose, revealing her slightly moving throat. That was a gentle arc, and Gong Chei's gaze couldn't help but be deeply attracted by that touch of whiteness. His Adam's apple moved as if he was infatuated. His amour, she was so beautiful that it made him use all of his breath to restrain himself. The happiest person was the Empress. Chei finally thought it through. Was there anything more worthy of being happy than this? The successive surprises made her dizzy, to the extent that she didn't pay attention to some details, thinking that Gong Chei had really let it go. After Gong Yimo finished drinking the wine, she only felt her heart relax. Her mood gradually improved. She was originally distressed about how to face Gong Chei, but now that Gong Chei had thought it through himself, it was the best. Because Gong Chei was really a good brother, able to bring warmth to others, and she only needed such a brother. Thinking of this, her smile also became more sincere. From the moment she came in, the low pressure that had been pervading the air finally dispersed, and everyone inexplicably felt their hearts lighten. At this time, the hearts of the noble ladies who were jealous of Su Miaolan were sour, and someone suddenly said, "Your Highness the Crown Prince really came at the right time." Sister Su is about to perform a dance. It's our honor." When she opened her mouth, Su Miaolon's originally shy expression changed. If the people present were all noble ladies, her performance wouldn't be a problem. But now that the crown prince came, and behind him were some trusted aides performing in front of so many people, how could she still keep her face? However, the other noble ladies didn't want to let her go. It's said that Sister Sue's dancing skills are superb. Today, we're in for a treat. That's right, that's right. When the crown prince heard this, his interest was piqued, and he asked someone to set up a table beside Gong Yimo. Since it's like this one is really lucky. If it's amazing, this one will heavily reward you. That meant that he didn't mind Su Miaolon dancing in front of everyone. Moreover, his smile was magnanimous, and his whole person was like the warm sun, making people feel comfortable without any intention of making things difficult. Many people couldn't help but think that the crown prince must have said this unintentionally, and definitely didn't understand the twists and turns of a woman. When the empress saw this, she frowned and was about to speak, but Su Miaolon gently smiled. Since it's like this subject's daughter will embarrass herself. She gently smiled at Gong Che, full of tenderness and expectation. In any case, she was going to marry the crown prince, so if she could better display herself in front of the crown prince, why not? When the other noble ladies saw that she agreed so quickly, they all scolded her in their hearts, but in the end, they were still envious of her being able to display herself in front of Gong Che. Even if they wanted to, they didn't have the guts. Chapter 281. The music rose once again. Not knowing if it was an illusion, everyone felt that the music seemed to be more cheerful. It seemed that Gong Che's return not only excited the empress, he was also very popular. Everyone in the palace welcomed his return. Su Miaolon began to dance to the music. At this moment, she was incomparably glad that she knew how to dance, because this was the only way she could show off her figure to her heart's content. From what she knew, Gong Che was 21 years old. Not to mention concubines, he didn't even have a tong fong. It was very likely that he was still inexperienced, so she was very confident that as long as she entered the crown prince's palace and became the crown prince's first woman, the crown prince would definitely be deeply attracted to her. At that time, she would firmly grasp his heart and not give any other woman a chance. But how could she have known that Gong Che was currently sitting beside Gong Yimo? The empress, who was on the right, would occasionally pull him aside to say something and praise Su Miaolon's dance. As for Gong Che, he was watching Su Miaolon's spinning figure. All his attention was on Gong Yimo, who was on his left. At this moment, he really wanted his empress mother to stop talking to him, but he had just returned. In a moment of excitement, his empress mother would definitely not let him off. But he also really wanted to talk to Immerse. It had been 3 years. A year ago, he wasn't sure if that person was her or not. But now, she was really sitting on his left. It made him really want to hug her and kiss her. Gong Che once again lowered his eyelids. After such a long time, he finally discovered his own abnormality. Every time he thought of Immerse, his eyes would turn scarlet red. So now that he wanted to disguise himself, he couldn't let Immerse find out. But he was very puzzled. Why did Immerse seem to have known about it a long time ago when he only found out about it in the past few years? She really understood him very well. Thinking of this, he couldn't control the desire in his heart. He didn't even hear the empress' voice. Che Che. The empress looked at him strangely. En? Gong Che suddenly regained his senses and looked at the empress. However, the empress gave him a displeased look. Stunned? The empress covered her mouth and laughed. Since you've been captivated by Miss Sue's dance, then you have to fulfill your promise. If the reward is too little, Imperial Mother won't be satisfied. Hearing this, Su Miaolon shyly lowered her head. Just now, she had danced very seriously. She was confident that the crown prince's heart would be moved. God knows, Gong Che didn't notice what she was dancing at all. All his attention was firmly glued to Gong Yimo. Who knew that she would finish dancing so quickly? Gong Che smiled. He glanced at Gong Yimo from the corner of his eyes and saw that she seemed to be in a good mood. He could not help but sigh at this heartless little thing. Miss Sue's dancing is indeed amazing. I'll give you a box of pearls, a natural jade pendant, and a pair of Southern Sea purple gold dangling ornaments. Oh right, I've recently obtained a pair of cloud orchid brocade. It's just right for Miss Sue's outstanding charm. Not to mention how precious the things Gong Che casually mentioned were. Just the cloud orchid brocade was enough to make people gasp in amazement. Many of the noble women present revealed an envious expression. These women thought a little more. It was said that water could make money. It seemed that the crown prince had accumulated a lot of wealth through this canal. Thinking of this, they felt that the crown prince's position was stable. No matter if it was his bearing, appearance, or status, he was a rare good man in this world. As for the cloud orchid brocade, who didn't know that it was the third best brocade in the world? Only Yuheng had it. Moreover, it was only produced 100 bolts a year. In addition, the two countries had not officially announced the imperial edict for trade. Even if you had money, you couldn't buy it. Su Miaolon was pleasantly surprised. Her cheeks blushed and she quickly thanked him. At this time, the empress said somewhat sourly, "Ai, as expected, the son has grown up and can't be controlled by his mother. Che, your imperial mother doesn't even have clothes made of cloud orchid brocade. You're so biased." Hearing this, Su Miaolon quickly said, "Your Highness's reward is too great. This subject's daughter doesn't dare to accept this cloud orchid brocade." Gong Che smiled. "I said I'll reward you, so I'll reward you. You deserve it." As he spoke, he said to the empress, "Cloud orchid brocade is indeed valuable. However, this subject's son has a bolt of cloud orchid brocade. It's specially for imperial mother." His words made everyone even more surprised. If it was only 100 bolts of cloud orchid brocade a year, then it would be fine. However, cloud orchid brocade was even rarer. There were only 20 bolts a year. Even in the imperial harem of Yuheng, it was a great honor for the concubines to have a dress made of cloud orchid brocade. A woman smiled and said, "Your Highness is really considerate. You can even obtain the second and third most valuable material in the world. It's a pity that we've only heard of its beauty but have never seen it. I wonder if we'll have the fortune to see it?" Gong Che said gently, "Madam, you're exaggerating. How can I be biased? Everyone present today will be rewarded." As soon as he said this, everyone knelt down in surprise. "Thank you, Crown Prince, for your reward." It had to be said that Gong Che was really becoming more and more mature. When he returned this time, he specially brought these things that could please women so that the empress could gain face. Didn't he see that the empress was grinning from ear to ear? She was so happy that she suddenly saw Gong Yimo sitting alone at the side. Now that her son had let go of that obsession, she also found Gong Yimo pleasing to the eye. She hurriedly said, "Chea, you haven't said what gift you brought for Imoer." Everyone present was silent for a moment. They also wanted to know what Gong Che would give Gong Yimo. They wondered if it could be compared to the priceless Yunjin. Gong Yimo also smiled and winked at Gong Che. "That's right, Crown Prince Gij. If you give too little, I, your imperial sister, won't accept it." Her playful appearance was so cute that Gong Che almost couldn't control himself. He lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, "Imperial sister's gift is naturally special. Later, I will personally give it to you." When he said this, because his eyes were lowered, he seemed a little cold. The empress finally believed that Gong Che had really let go, so they ignored the word special. Gong Yimo didn't mind whether he was cold or not. She giggled and said, "Then I, your imperial sister, will look forward to it." At this time, Su Miaolon also returned to her seat. She raised her head and puffed out her chest, feeling the envy from all directions. She became even more proud because this was the glory brought by her fiancé. However, she also regretted something. The reason why Gong Yimo had a special place in the Crown Prince's heart was because only Gong Yimo helped the Crown Prince during his most difficult time. Unfortunately, at that time, Gong Che almost lost his position as Crown Prince. So, whether it was her or her family, They didn't dare to step in and missed a good opportunity. Who knew that he would be able to make a comeback? As the saying goes, adding flowers to embroidery is not as good as providing charcoal in snowy weather. However, she was confident that as long as she became the Crown Prince's consort, she would definitely win back the Crown Prince's heart. She wouldn't give a single shred of it to others. After Su Miaolon's performance, the Empress arranged for singing and dancing. Today was a good day, so she couldn't help but drink a few more cups. After 30 cups of wine, Gong Che finally felt relieved when he saw that his mother didn't talk to him anymore. He mustered up his courage and said to Gong Yimo, "It's been a few years since we last met. How has Imperial Sister been?" Chapter 282. As he spoke, he quickly glanced at her and did not dare to look at her again. Under his sleeves, his hands were tightly clenched. Just being able to talk peacefully with her like this made him feel very satisfied. The suffering of these 3 years seemed to have been smoothed out, leaving behind only desire and anticipation. Gong Yimo heard this and smiled at him. She was happier than anyone that Gong Che could let go of her. Because of the grudges from her previous life, she was very familiar with Gong Dai. In the past few years, they had supported each other, so she was very close to him. However, it was impossible for her to fall in love with him. But to be able to live peacefully with Gong Che and have an older brother that she could rely on, this kind of feeling was very good. Crown Prince Gidge, you're looking down on me too much. Which part of my life is not good? Although she had grown up and seemed to be more mature, when she was in a good mood, her lively eyes were like the sun in spring when she spoke, making everything around her full of vitality. At this time, she really did not suspect that Gong Che would pretend to let go. She was not a person who liked to be suspicious. Under normal circumstances, she also did not like to scheme against others. Therefore, she easily believed him. Gong Che saw that she was close to him again, and he couldn't help but feel glad that he had chosen the right method. Thinking of this, his eyes became as gentle as water, and he smiled as he talked about the topic that she was interested in. Now that Yuheng and Daiyu State are about to open trade, there is no need to set up any more defenses along the waterway. Soon, we can openly do business. In the past, Gong Yimo had said that illegal immigration was only temporary. One day, she would open up trade between the 4 countries. He never thought that she would really do it as a woman. This was something that Gong Che sincerely admired. Gong Yimo smiled with a bit of pride. Suddenly, she thought of something and looked at Gong Che with a bit of nervousness. Her eyebrows raised. My fleet has already taken shape. Even if we change from illegal immigration to official business, those waterways will still be mine. They will all be mine. She narrowed her eyes and stared at Gong Che. Brother Crown Prince, you already have control over most of the resources in the canal. You won't want to fight with me over these little streams, right? Her expression changed very quickly, and the way she clutched her pocket almost melted Gong Che's heart. He really wanted to tell her, "It's yours, it's all yours if you want. I can give you the whole Grand Canal, as long as you are mine." But he didn't dare. He was trapped in a cage and had gone crazy, but when he saw her pity, he would gladly endure it. As long as you want it, those are all yours. He seemed to have said these words with the tip of his tongue, and his tone was incomparably affectionate. However, he suddenly realized something. Afraid that Gong Yimo would be alerted, he quickly said, "After all, it's all thanks to you that I'm where I am now." Gong Yimo's eyes curved into crescents. She loved to hear people thank her and praise her. "Then, you have to return the shipyard at Hongzhou to me." "All right. I also want to open a shipyard in the Huai River. It's all up to you." Gong Yimo really wanted to cheer. She felt that her obedient big brother Crown Prince had returned. That doting gaze was simply too obvious. "Many thanks, big brother Crown Prince," she happily said. Suddenly, she thought of something and pretended to dig around in her sleeves. After a while, she pulled out a small cloth bag and said in a very forthright manner, "Since Big Brother Crown Prince is so generous, This imperial sister also can't be stingy. Here, I'll give this good thing to you. Gong Che curiously received it. When he opened it, he discovered that there were more than 10 stalks of perfectly preserved herbs. This is? At this time, he still didn't know the use of the water cloud grass, so he didn't recognize it. Gong Yimo mysteriously moved closer and said, "This matter was no small matter, so it couldn't be heard by others." Her warm breath blew into Gong Che's ear, causing him to stiffen abruptly, not daring to move an inch. Big Brother Crown Prince, according to reliable news, your congenital heart disease isn't incurable. And this water cloud grass is the key. Why don't you let your secret doctor do a thorough research on this? I hope you can recover soon. This step was 5 years earlier than in his previous life. Gong Che never thought that his heart disease, which he had to constantly take medicine to prevent others from knowing about, could actually be cured. At this moment, his heart was thumping. He didn't know if it was because of this great news or because of Gong Yimo's alluring body fragrance. Gong Yimo smiled proudly. "There's no need to thank me. When you're really well, then you can thank me." When she said this, her lips accidentally brushed against his earlobe. Gong Che only felt that his heart disease seemed to have suddenly relapsed. At this moment, he actually felt that her existence made it difficult for him to breathe. Gong Yimo smiled as she retreated and even patted his back. Seeing Gong Che's stunned expression, she thought that he was stunned by this great news. When she retreated, although Gong Che felt that he could breathe again, it was as if a piece of his heart was suddenly missing. He really couldn't accept that she had suddenly distanced herself from him. The Empress didn't think much of their close interaction, but Su Miaolon felt very uncomfortable. Gong Yimo was beautiful and Gong Che was also very gentle and handsome. Looking at them, it seemed like they were a pair. This point almost made her tear the handkerchief in her hand. Wasn't it just helping the Crown Prince once in a time of danger? Wasn't it just protecting the Crown Prince on the boat back to the capital when he was injured? Whether or not it was because she had a powerful weapon on her that dragged the Crown Prince down was another matter. What was so great about a woman appearing in public? But what right did she have to be so close to the Crown Prince? And she, the future Crown Princess, had to sit in front of them? At this time, Gong Che finally recovered his state of mind. As long as he thought about how Gong Yimo had placed his illness in her heart, found a way to treat it, and even carried the key medicine with her every day, he couldn't help but feel a surge in his heart that was hard to suppress. He was different to Immerse. No matter if it was based on familial affection or love, as long as he was different, it made him very excited. He wished he could hug her, kiss her, and thank her. No. He couldn't think about it. He couldn't think about it. As long as he thought about the day when he could hug Gong Yimo and kiss her wantonly, his heart would tremble. It was as if his entire body was covered in thorns. Only by being close to her could he be saved. But he didn't dare to approach her. After thinking for a while, he could only reach out and pat her head. "Thank you, Immerse." Gong Yimo felt that she had put down the heavy matter in her heart and returned his smile. This medicine was originally because she felt that she couldn't respond to him, so she specially went to pick it as compensation for him. But now, since Gong Che had put it down himself, then she had no more obstacles in her heart. She directly gave it to him, hoping that he would get better soon. The interaction between the two made Su Miaolon unable to continue watching, and she suddenly stood up. Chapter 283. Everyone's gaze gathered on her body. Even the Empress was curious. What's wrong? Su Miaolon wasn't being impulsive. She was really prepared. "Your Highness," she bowed towards Gong Che. Gong Che's doting smile disappeared, and he looked at her strangely. He must have forgotten that Su Miaolon was his fiancée. Su Miaolon shyly smiled and took out an item from her bosom. "This subject also has something to give to your Highness. I hope your Highness won't reject it." Gong Che's smile froze for a moment. Many noble ladies felt that Su Miaolon's action was inappropriate. However, she was the future crown princess. If the crown prince didn't say anything, they couldn't say anything in public. The empress was stunned for a moment before she smiled and said, "You're so considerate. Let me see what it is." Su Miaolon shyly looked at Gong Che and then handed over the item in her hand. "This is?" The empress looked at it with surprise. She found that it was a very delicate pouch with intertwined twigs embroidered on it. Strangely, when it was exposed to light, the intertwined twigs seemed to bloom. However, when it was placed in the dark, it didn't bloom. It was really exquisite. This made her forget how ambiguous the intertwined twigs were. She passed it down and let the other madams see it. Everyone noticed this point, and for a moment, they were full of praises. Gong Yimo was curious. When she took it and saw it, she almost spat it out. "What's wrong?" Gong Che was very nervous about her every move. He asked and took it for a look. At this moment, Su Miaolon bowed and said, "This subject was handmade by myself. It was placed in front of the Buddha for 49 days. Now, I'm giving it to Your Highness. I hope Your Highness won't reject it." At this moment, Gong Che suddenly felt that the pouch in his hand was very hot, especially when Imo saw the pattern of the twin flowers. Gong Yimo held back her laughter painfully, because this embroidery was obviously the work of Yu Qi, the god of embroidery. That girl had yet to truly rise up, so it was very rare for Su Miaolon to be able to get her embroidery. But now, in order to prove herself, she actually said that she embroidered it herself. Wasn't she afraid of being slapped in the face in the future? But when she thought about it, even if she was exposed in the future, she could say that she was the disciple of the other party. Presumably, with her status as the crown prince consort, that clever woman wouldn't mind having a disciple like her. Before Gong Che could say anything, the empress laughed. "I've long heard that Miss Su's embroidery skills are excellent. How thoughtful of you. Che, why don't you accept it?" She glared at Gong Che, hinting for Gong Che to accept it, lest the girl be put on the spot. Gong Che forced a smile. "In that case, thank you, Miss Su." Su Miaolon was very happy to be in the limelight again. She raised her head and smiled generously. "This is what I should do." When she said this, she glanced at Gong Yimo very proudly and blurted out, "I only hope that it can accompany Your Highness at all times. You might as well directly say that you want to accompany the crown prince at all times." Many noble ladies thought of this at the same time and despised Su Miaolon's boldness. Gong Yimo felt her teeth ache. Just how much did she want to get married? Well, after Gong Che rose to power in her previous life, Su Miaolon also yearned to marry him. In this life, Gong Che was younger than in her previous life and was even more glorious. It was inevitable that she would hold on to him so tightly and impatiently. Not to mention Gong Yimo, even Gong Che felt that Su Miaolon's words were too bold. He suddenly spoke with a serious expression. "This prince will accept the pouch, but Miss Su, please be careful with your words." If he didn't mention this matter, no one would say anything. But his words were like a public slap to Su Miaolon's face. Even if he was telling the truth, this kind of occasion made people embarrassed for no reason. At that moment, Su Miaolon seemed to hear other people's low sneers. Just when she was embarrassed and didn't know what to do, a eunuch announced, "Prince Qi has arrived." Prince Qi. Many noble ladies' eyes lit up, but the noble ladies were both expectant and afraid. When Gong Ju revealed his claws and teeth on the heavens platform that day, they only felt that he was majestic. But with a few words, he tore apart 4 families. In particular, former friends were sent to the educational division. They admired Gong Ju's appearance and domineering aura, but at the same time, they were terrified of his ruthlessness and mercilessness. But no matter what they thought, Gong Dai only came to find the royal sister. Gong Che was too dangerous, so when he received the news that Gong Che returned to the capital, he immediately rushed back from the suburbs. He wouldn't give Gong Che any chance. When Gong Che heard that Gong Dai came, his smile froze. Wasn't he training the imperial guards in the wilderness? How did he get the news so quickly? Gong Yimo was happy at first, but then she remembered the emperor's words. Her smile sank and she snorted. When Gong Dai came, he first looked at Gong Yimo and then bowed to the empress. When he saw Gong Che, he was not surprised. He also bowed very coldly and then pulled Gong Yimo to leave. At this time, Gong Che suddenly stood up and subconsciously pulled Gong Yimo's other hand. He looked at Gong Dai with naked coldness. What do you want to do? Gong Dai's eyes suddenly turned cold. His gaze fell on Gong Che's hand, and he narrowed his eyes. Imperial Father ordered an important matter, but he needs the royal sister's help. Imperial Brother, do you have any objections? Gong Yimo also looked at Gong Che strangely. Gong Che seemed to wake up from a dream and let go of her hand reluctantly. You shouldn't be in such a hurry. It's almost time for the banquet. I'm really sorry. Imperial Father's orders can't be delayed. Gong Che couldn't help but mock. What, without a mo-er? You can't complete Imperial Father's task? Yes. Gong Dai answered without hesitation, which directly made Gong Che speechless. At this moment, the two people's gazes collided and seemed to create sparks. The atmosphere at the scene became tense. The Empress' expression also became serious, and she didn't say anything. After taking a deep breath, Gong Che finally calmed himself down. With so many people present, he really couldn't be too entangled. So Gong Dai sneered and took Gong Yimo away, completely ignoring the strange looks from the people present. Gong Che watched as Gong Yimo was dragged away, but he didn't have the right to make her stay. This feeling of helplessness made him want to kill someone for the first time in his life. Gong Yimo was pulled along by Gong Dai and was a little confused. Gong Dai, where are you taking me? When she asked this, the two had already walked into a garden. Gong Dai suddenly stopped, causing her to almost bump into him. At this moment, he turned around and looked deeply at the person in front of him. His expression was complicated as he asked in a low voice, Royal Sister, I heard that Imperial Father is looking for you for an urgent matter today. What is the reason? At the mention of this matter, Gong Yimo was a little unhappy. She shook off Gong Dai's hand and said indifferently, You're hurting me. Gong Dai saw that her mood had suddenly sunk and smiled instead as he asked softly, Imperial Father wants you to persuade me to get married? Gong Yimo glared at him. Since you already know, why are you still asking? Gong Dai looked at her. For some reason, his ink-black eyes suddenly revealed a trace of affection, and his tone also became gentle. It's nothing. I just want to know, when Imperial Father wants you to do this, are you happy or sad? Gong Yimo was stunned. She didn't expect Gong Dai to ask this. He continued to ask, not allowing her to dodge at all. Are you happy that you can finally shake me off, or are you a little sad in your heart? Chapter 284. Happy or sad? Gong Yimo was stumped by this question, and it was a question she did not want to answer. So she turned to leave, but Gong Dai pulled her back tightly. Royal Sister, as long as you answer my question, I'll let you go. Gong Yimo was a little annoyed, and she flung his hand away. What's there to be happy about? Imperial Father just wanted me to pass on a message, nothing else. Gong Dai stared into her eyes. Then what do you want to tell me? Why not? Gong Yimo did not dare to look at him, and she turned to look at the withered leaves. Little Princess Lu Yi is beautiful and has a good temperament. She's good enough for you. Are these your heartfelt words? Gong Dai stood there and raised his eyebrows slightly. His black brocade robe set off his fair face, and at this moment, his clear eyes were staring coldly at her, making her feel even more pressured with every word she said. I'm serious. She gritted her teeth and nodded. Anyway, But in the next second, her lips were locked by Gong Ju. She widened her eyes and pushed him away. Gong Dai. She looked around, and when she saw that there was no one around, she heaved a sigh of relief. She glared fiercely at Gong Dai. Are you crazy? This is the palace, not the bedchamber. Royal Sister, do you mean that it's fine if we're in the bedchamber? He hooked a strand of Gong Yimo's hair and asked with a chuckle. Gong Yimo's face flushed red, and she said angrily, It's not fine even if we're in the bedchamber. Royal Sister hasn't answered my question. Why is he still asking that question? Gong Yimo exploded. I don't mind. You can marry whoever you want. It's fine. Once she finished speaking, Gong Dai hooked his arm around the back of her head again and domineeringly lowered his head to kiss her little mouth. You. Gong Yimo tried to break free, but she couldn't. Her entire body tensed up, afraid that someone would see it. Finally, she turned her head with great effort. Gong Dai was still kissing her earlobe and neck. Let me go. Are you crazy? Gong Dai stopped and hugged her. He chuckled, but there was a fire burning in the depths of his eyes. I'm not crazy. It's just that royal sister is too naughty. I have to teach her a lesson, he asked again with a smirk. Are you really not sad? I'm not sad. I am very happy. However, Gong Dai blocked her words with a kiss. The two of them did it in the palace as if no one else was around. If someone saw this, would Gong Dai really not care about the consequences? Aren't you sad? He interrogated her again and again. I'm happy. Oh, really? Being kissed time and time again, Gong Yimo's heart was filled with anger. Gong Dai was simply playing with fire. But I'm very sad. Suddenly, his low voice entered her ears, causing her to almost lose her mind. She looked up. Gong Dai's devilish face was close to hers. He was originally cold, noble, and arrogant, but now, the sadness in his eyes was so obvious. When I knew that you promised Imperial Father to persuade me to get married, this place was very painful. It was as if you had stabbed me with a knife. He pinched Gong Yimo's hand and poked his heart. His voice was still very calm, but every word was filled with sorrow. In the end, it was almost inaudible. That's why I want to know if you're sad or not. If you're sad, I think I can recover without medicine. He smiled bitterly, but if you're not sad, if you're happy. He paused for a while before saying the second half of the sentence. If you're happy, there's no other way. Because I will still pester you until the day you die. Gong Yimo was stunned. Being forced by him, hearing him say such words, she was really at a loss. Now, tell me, are you happy or sad? I'm happy. She thought that she could easily say these few words, but when she looked into his eyes, she found that her lips seemed to be stuck by something, and she couldn't say a word. Her hesitation made Gong Dai's eyes light up. Royal sister, do you like me? I don't. Gong Yimo quickly refuted, but Gong Dai hugged her in his arms. It's okay. It's okay if you don't like me. Because whether you like me or not, you're still my person. I'm just very happy that you're hesitating. Today, you're sad because of Imperial Father's words, right? Gong Yimo wanted to say no, but she couldn't say it. She could only remain silent. Gong Dai was even happier. Royal sister, I'm really sorry that Imperial Father made you sad. But I won't. As he spoke, he was moved to kiss her lips. Gong Yimo nervously dodged a few times, but in the end, she couldn't dodge and was kissed by him. The two bodies were leaning against each other, so harmonious, tight, and intimate that an outsider couldn't get in. Gong Chei's fingers dug deep into the bark of the tree. From afar, he stood behind the tree, looking at them with a gloomy expression. He was really unwilling to let Gong Yimo be taken away by Gong Dai like this, so he found an opportunity to come out. He didn't expect to see this scene with his own eyes in this secluded garden. He never had the chance to kiss her like this. He also never hugged her like this, so why could Gong Dai do it? Why? His heart felt like it was being torn apart. This feeling was so similar to when Gong Yimo wished him to have a child soon. Gong Chei's eyes gradually turned red. He really wanted to separate the two of them. He wanted to ask Gong Yimo why she resisted him, but she couldn't reject Gong Dai. How was he inferior to Gong Dai? How was he inferior to Gong Dai? In terms of kinship, Gong Dai was her little brother that she raised. If he couldn't, then could Gong Dai? He really wanted to rush out. Kill that man. As long as Gong Dai was dead, no one would come to steal his treasure. When he became the emperor, Immerse would be his empress. They could be very loving and happy. But Gong Dai actually wanted to steal his treasure. That was his. His. The sharp barbs on the bark pierced his fingertips, causing them to bleed. But Gong Che didn't feel it. His knuckles were pale, and it was obvious that he was still exerting force. He couldn't go out. He even had to pretend that he didn't see it. He couldn't go out. He couldn't. This anger, pain, and helplessness, it made him want to tear the whole world apart. He wanted everyone to die, and only the two of them were left. Gong Yimo couldn't take it anymore. Could Gong Dai not care about her? This was the Imperial Palace. She struggled again. This time, Gong Dai wasn't angry. Instead, he smiled faintly. "Royal sister, don't be angry." Gong Yimo glared at him. She didn't want to bother with him. "Royal sister, I promise that I won't marry anyone except you." Gong Yimo immediately stomped her feet. "It's not like I don't want you to marry me. It's up to you whether you want to marry me or not." After saying that fiercely, she ran away. She didn't want to be entangled with Gong Dai anymore. Gong Dai was like a gangster now, taking advantage of her at every turn. After Gong Yimo left, Gong Dai seemed to sense something and turned around. At this time, Gong Che was completely hidden behind a tree. A corner of his black robe was revealed, and Gong Dai smiled cruelly. Chapter 285. Was it painful? Was it uncomfortable? He had to let Gong Che know who had the rights to ownership. Therefore, he didn't mind letting Gong Che take a good look and recognize the truth. After he left, Gong Che leaned against a tree and slowly squatted down. At this moment, his face was flushed and he seemed to be out of breath. His hands trembled as he took out a jade bottle and poured out a pill. However, it took him a few tries before he managed to stuff it into his mouth. He bit down on his lower lip and didn't make a sound. He allowed the bitter taste to spread in his mouth. However, this bitterness was nothing compared to the bitterness in his heart. He was so angry, so hateful, so resentful, and so painful. Immerse clearly treated him differently. Without Gong Dai, Immerse definitely wouldn't reject him. If she could accept Gong Dai, then she could definitely accept him. Therefore, it was good that Gong Dai was dead. It was good that he was dead. Immerse, Gong Che closed his eyes in defeat. "Even in my dreams, I want you to kiss me. Even in my dreams." The next few days were very peaceful. In any case, she had already delivered the message. She didn't care about Gong Dai's reaction. Yes, she didn't need to care. On this day, Gong Yimo was reading in her room. Regarding Lu Yi and Yu Heng wanting to build a passage for horses, she vaguely had a plan in mind. If she could convince Daiyu State, Yu Heng, and Lu Yi to open a passage that would connect the three countries directly, then along the way, she could build a horse ranch at intervals. She didn't know if it would be possible for the ranches of the three countries to reach a unified agreement for transportation. This way, it would be like a relay station and they could transfer between stations midway. For example, if Daiyu State wanted to ship goods to Lu Yi, they would entrust the horse farms of the three kingdoms to do so. Then, from the start of the shipment to Lu Yi, they would have to pass through more than a dozen horse farms. Every time they arrived at a horse farm, they would have to change horses to transport the goods. This way, the speed would be much faster and the horses would have a chance to rest. In addition, there were merchants coming and going from the south to the north. If a horse went to Lu Yi, it would be brought back by Lu Ye's merchants. Because of this, the number of horses in each horse farm would be maintained at a balanced number. On the other hand, merchants only needed to bear the cost of transportation, greatly reducing the cost and risk. After all, this horse farm belonged to the country. Even if there were bandits, the horse farms could still help each other. Moreover, if there was nothing to do on a normal day, the horse farm could also be used as a place to produce horses and practice riding and shooting. When the merchants walked to the next horse farm, they could also directly rest at the horse farm's relay station. They did not need to sleep in the wilderness. If one really wanted to describe it, It would probably be a product of combining escort agencies, relay stations, and logistics companies in the future. However, it could include basic necessities such as food, clothing, housing, and transportation. This would create a lot of benefits and convenience. This way, not only would it promote prosperity, but more importantly, it would maintain the three kingdoms on a win-win boat. Once there were frequent exchanges between citizens and countries, and even intermarriage, then in the future, even if a country's ruler became muddle-headed and wanted to go to war, he would not be able to do so because the citizens would not agree. After all, when the citizens were rich, the rulers could only restrain their ambitions. This was because other than their ambitions, they also had an important iron law and mission, and that was to make the country rich. If the four countries were side by side, everyone would feel happy and the country would be able to develop at any time. Then, what kind of impact would an ambitious emperor bring? Gong Yimo laughed. This sudden idea was not bad. After all, she did not have the idea of annexing the four countries and unifying the Central Plains. Now that communication was not developed, the consequence of a superpower existing was that it would not be easy to control. Many local officials would become arrogant, and they could even seal the city gates and become the local emperor without letting the real emperor know. Therefore, there were also benefits to the coexistence of the four countries. Also, between countries, they could improve together by comparing with each other. When the territory was small, it would be easier to govern, and there would not be any blind spots. Once there was any reform, the four countries would work together, and it would be much easier to do anything. Most importantly, when the wealth was balanced, peace would be achieved, and there would be no wars. Of course, to achieve this goal, there was still a lot to do. Then, the only problem now was, how would she convince Emperor Lu Yi? Because once it involved the horse farm, Lu Yi would definitely contribute the most. However, looking at the situation of the barren land, Lu Yi would also be the one who would gain the most. It was just that she did not know if Longcheng Wuji had the courage to do so. She was not worried about Yu Heng. According to reliable sources, Jin Shang was about to die of illness. Yu Heng had become Kim Yun's sole authority. Moreover, it was said that he would soon come to Dayu State to discuss the period of trade between the two countries. When the time came, it would not be a big problem to mention it to him. As she was thinking and writing, unknowingly, an entire morning had passed. She also put down her pen and stretched her fingers. This matter was very important. There were many details, management, regulations, responsibilities, etc. She was just thinking about it. After all, she had promised Longcheng Wuji last time that she would give him a good idea. With a belly full of thoughts, Gong Yimo wanted to discuss with the emperor. Therefore, she carried a pile of documents and walked towards the imperial study. Now that Gong Yimo's status was high, she had the privilege of entering the imperial study without needing to report. However, when she walked in, she was informed by the palace servants that the emperor had gone to inspect the imperial army's drill and would be back later. Look, even the crown prince was waiting in the imperial study. Hearing that Gong Che was there, Gong Yimo was a little conflicted. Although Gong Che had said that it was all in the past, it was still a little awkward to suddenly meet him. However, she thought about it again. She could not delay the important matter because of this awkwardness. If Gong Che knew that she had come but did not enter, he might think too much. Therefore, she directly walked in. At this time, there were no palace servants in the imperial study. There was only Gong Che. When Gong Yimo entered, he was looking up at a famous painting. However, his expression was bleak, as if there was something very heavy on his mind. It should not be. Gong Che was in high spirits now. Why would he have such an expression? Hearing the movement, Gong Che thought that the emperor had come. However, when he turned around and saw that it was Gong Yimo, he was stunned on the spot. His expression was complicated. Brother Crown Prince? Gong Yimo smiled as she walked closer. She threw the things in her hands on the dragon table and blinked to greet him. What have you been busy with these few days? You've been very secretive. She was just saying that. Unexpectedly, Gong Che suddenly said, "Then do you want to see me?" His words stunned Gong Yimo. Before she could understand what he meant, Gong Che reached out and patted her head. What I mean is, even if you wanted to see me, I didn't see you coming to find me. It seems that after being separated for so long, we have become estranged. When he said that, his expression became even more desolate. Gong Yimo quickly shook her head. How is that possible? Brother Crown Prince has always been Brother Crown Prince. There is no estrangement. Gong Che smiled. She did not know if it was Gong Yimo's illusion, but she felt that Gong Che seemed to be different in some way. However, she could not tell what was different. Chapter 286. Immerse. The last time you gave me the herb, I let the doctor take a look at it, and he said that it's very effective for my illness. He hid the turbulent emotions in his eyes and took a step closer to Gong Yimo, smiling gently. He also said that the herb is very precious and it's priceless. All of this is thanks to you, royal sister. Gong Yimo waved her hand, wanting to say that it's all right, it's just a small matter. However, she suddenly thought of something and laughed, revealing her white teeth. Then shouldn't Brother Crown Prince thank me? What do you want? What do you mean what I want? Brother Crown Prince, did you forget that you said you brought me a present? Where's the present? She poked his chest fiercely with her index finger. Gong Che strangely held her hand and looked up at her. How about I give you all of me? His Adam's apple bobbed. What I give you will naturally be the best. As he spoke, he lowered his head and whispered something in her ear. Gong Yimo's eyes lit up when she heard it. Are you serious? She was so surprised by his words that she completely forgot how close he was at this moment. Of course. Gong Che lowered his eyes, the sweet scent of her body clearly enveloping him, making him take a deep breath. Needless to say, his eyes must have turned red at this moment, deeply longing for her color. That's great. Gong Yimo looked up and thanked him excitedly. Brother Crown Prince is so considerate. Since you're the one who discovered this coal mine, you'll definitely benefit from it in the future. I don't want those benefits. Money? He really had too much right now. Then what do you want? Gong Yimo's thoughts were now on the coal mine. She didn't expect that Gong Che really took her words to heart. When he was digging a tributary, he discovered the coal mine and protected it, only telling her about it. Looking at her obviously distracted little face, Gong Che couldn't help but think about how Gong Dai had kissed her that day. He also wanted to try. What do I want? I only want you. At this moment, the emperor walked in with a big smile on his face. I heard that Immerse is here? Then it must be something good. When Gong Yimo heard this, she quickly turned around and ran over. However, Gong Che remained in the same spot with an inexplicable expression. The moment Gong Ching entered, he saw the casually dressed Gong Yimo and frowned slightly. Immerse, it's not that we want to criticize you, but you're already so old and have such a noble status. How can you not pay attention to your image at all? Gong Yimo's hair was tied up in a ponytail. She was wearing a modified light yellow cross-collar robe and a light green floral skirt. She looked good in everything, especially this kind of extremely simple style, which could accentuate her temperament and appearance. However, as a noble princess, it was a bit inappropriate to dress too simply. Gong Yimo was not convinced. She spun around, and her skirt fluttered in the wind. The layers of embroidery seemed to come alive, and her smile was like a flower. What's wrong with it? Crown Prince Gidge, don't you think it looks good? Gong Che subconsciously said. Imperial sister looks good in everything. Gong Yimo proudly snorted at the emperor. However, the emperor glared at Gong Che. Look at how spoiled you guys are. I'm afraid she'll become undisciplined and out of control in the future. Gong Che laughed. He wanted to spoil her and indulge her in everything she did. All right, Immerse, Che, why are you looking for us? Gong Che said, it's about the Grand Canal's conferring ceremony. This matter still needs Imperial Father to personally handle. Gong Chung suddenly remembered that Gong Che's return meant that the Grand Canal had been completely repaired. They were going to hold the conferring ceremony and worship the heavens and earth. This was indeed a big matter. He nodded. We know. Tomorrow, We will discuss this matter with the officials. You can submit the memorial during the morning court. With that, he looked at Gong Yimo again. Girl, what kind of wicked idea did you come up with? Gong Yimo smiled and quickly showed the results of the morning to Gong Chung. Imperial Father, this son's good news is not worse than the conferring ceremony. If this matter is done well, I guarantee that Imperial Father's good name will definitely be passed down through the ages. You will be greatly praised by future generations. Gong Chung was amused by her and laughed. You, tell me, what good news did you come up with? Gong Yimo hurriedly told the emperor her thoughts, including which relay stations would be convenient to convert into horse farms, including improving the carriage and production, as well as the benefits, cost, impact, and so on. Moreover, she did not guard against Gong Che at all. In any case, as the future emperor of a country, he would have to come into contact with these things. The more Gong Chung and Gong Che listened, the more they felt that it was wonderful. Gong Cheng's expression became more and more calm. Obviously, he was thinking, while Gong Che's mind gradually wandered off. He looked at Gong Yimo's small mouth that opened and closed. When she talked about the construction plan, her lively eyes and expression were soaring. She had astonishing talent, but she also knew when to yield and when to stand tall. Her attitude was humble. She was like a sponge. Sometimes, when Gong Chung said a few words to the point, she would quickly write it down. It could be seen that when she did things, she was modest and calm. She did not hide anything and was willing to casually speak out such a wonderful idea for everyone to discuss, instead of monopolizing the credit for fear that others would interfere. She also did not like to take credit. Whether it was the West Continent, the canal, or the bank, she just did it. She never cared about the results she had already achieved, as if the past was the past and was not worth mentioning. However, there were always countless wonderful ideas in her mind, which made people deeply attracted to her and could only be attracted to her. Gong Che asked himself, there would not be another woman as special as her in this world. If she could not belong to him, then why did God let him meet her? Your idea is very good. After Gong Chung carefully pondered, his eyes lit up. However, just as Gong Yimo thought, there were many difficulties to overcome. Although he was very moved, he only praised her verbally. In that case, the heavy burden of persuading King Lu Yi and second Prince Yuheng will be handed to you. Don't let Jin down. Gong Yimo's small face fell, and she wailed, Imperial Father, it's not fair. I'm the one who came up with the idea, but I'm also the one who put in the effort. Gong Chung was amused by her small appearance and raised his thick eyebrows. There's no other way. The capable do more work. Jin really couldn't find anyone else suitable to do this matter, so it's only you. Gong Yimo pouted and poked Gong Che, who was still in a daze. Gij Crown Prince, Imperial Father is bullying me again. Quickly stop him. Her eyes were watery and she looked very wronged, making Gong Che's heart have an impulse to solve all of her unwillingness. Gong Chung smiled. It's no use even if you look for him. This matter is settled. When we send Princess Lu Ye's envoy back, Jin will send you out to discuss important matters. Hearing that Gong Yimo was leaving, Gong Che frowned. Imperial Father, Imo is a woman. I'm afraid it's not appropriate. If it's another woman, then it's fine. Gong Chung looked at Gong Yimo very proudly. But Imo her ability is more outstanding than any of your brothers. Of course, Che, Jean is not saying that you're not outstanding, but don't be jealous of Imo. Haha. When he said this, it was obvious that he had already made up his mind. Moreover, Gong Che thought that this was also good. If he could let Gong Dai marry Princess Lu Yi while Imo was away, then when Imo returned, Gong Dai would definitely give up on Gong Dai. Therefore, after saying this, he didn't speak anymore. Later, when Gong Dai found out about this matter, he felt that the emperor did it on purpose. He purposely sent the royal sister away, and he had already made up his mind. No matter what others said, he wouldn't relent. Chapter 287. The weather was getting colder and colder. Every household was decorated with lanterns and decorations. At this time, Yuheng's people were actually coming. This made Emperor Gong very surprised. He originally thought that Yuheng's turmoil had just subsided. Even if Kim Yun wanted to visit, it should be after the new year. However, he came in such a hurry. It was obvious that he attached great importance to the trade between Yuheng and Daiyu State. Therefore, when Emperor Gong received the news, he spent 3 days arranging the palace banquet to welcome Yuheng and the others. On this day, it was snowing lightly. However, the entire capital was bustling with noise and excitement. A very luxurious carriage slowly drove into the city. If Gong Yimo was here, she would definitely say that this was the correct way for a monarch to visit. Last time, she forced Longqing Wuji to appear in a low-key and hurried manner. When she went back and thought about it, she would definitely be furious. The city gates were wide open. In addition to the 24 carriages at the front, there were many people following behind. Each of them had outstanding looks. They were wearing luxurious robes and carrying swords. They sat high on the backs of horses. Obviously, they were Kim Yun's personal attendants. And behind them, there were a total of 129 congratulatory gifts. Each of them was covered with red cloth, forming a long line. At this time, the people suddenly realized their emperor's birthday was coming soon. When the emperor heard that Kim Yun had gathered such a large number of people, he was a little surprised. Then, he revealed a smile. After all, being respected by the prince of a neighboring country made him proud. He also felt that Kim Yun must be a humble and courteous person, because before, it was only a verbal discussion. This time, the meeting represented the real finalization of the cooperation. Therefore, Emperor Gong made a sufficient gesture. He personally led the officials in front of the palace gates to welcome Kim Yun's arrival. It could be said that he was expressing a grand welcome for Kim Yun's arrival. At this time, Gong Yimo was in the palace being urged by the palace servants to dress up. Tonight, Emperor Gong would not allow her to be so casual. Gong Che, and the others were in front of the palace gates, standing beside the emperor. At this moment, they watched as Kim Yun walked down the carriage step by step. Kim Yun was famous for his good looks. Back then, when he was the #1 beauty in the world, he had to put on makeup and trim his eyebrows. But now, he had power, money, and status in his hands. It could be said that he was only one step away from ascending to the top. Therefore, he was completely different from before, but he was even more outstanding. His sword-like eyebrows reached his temples, and his red lips were bloodthirsty. The magnanimous calmness between his brows made Kim Yun's appearance even more dazzling. From the moment he stepped down from the carriage, he had firmly grasped everyone's gaze. Gong Chung was also stunned by the man in front of him. He secretly thought that in terms of appearance, there were many outstanding sons among his sons. At this time, he couldn't help but sigh. After all, this was the world of the young. King Lu Yi had succeeded in his rebellion. The Yuheng monarch had also fallen, and Empress Dowager Yuqi seemed to be having a hard time. Once these young people rose up, they would be unstoppable. Daiyu State's monarch greets you. Kim Yun took the first step to salute. Gong Chung laughed heartily and helped her up. Why are you acting so distant? Now that the cooperation between the two countries is imminent, if you don't mind, you can call me uncle. I am a few years older than you, so I will call you nephew. His words showed great enthusiasm to Kim Yun. Kim Yun slightly hooked his lips and gladly accepted. Thank you, uncle. The two looked at each other and smiled. Kim Yun was personally led into the imperial palace by Gong Chung. Together, they sat in the imperial carriage and walked towards the main palace. Along the way, they were majestic, but they didn't make much noise. Kim Yun saw this and had a clear understanding of Daiyu State's prosperity and the strictness of the system. This was the country where Immerse was from. He couldn't help but smile. Gong Chung thought that he was admiring the exquisite atmosphere of Daiyu State's imperial palace and didn't know that the other party was peeping at his daughter. The palace banquet was completely prepared. When everyone took their seats, the grand and complicated morning music sounded. It was auspicious and luxurious, as if a corner of the Golden Age had been lifted at this moment. The officials had already arrived. On such a day, they were allowed to bring their families, but they could only sit behind the curtains on both sides. There were 2 rows of seats set up. Of the women present, except for the Empress and the 2 concubines, the other women, including the princess, couldn't show their faces. Of course, Gong Yimo was an exception. At the banquet, her seat was set between the crown prince and Gong Dai, representing her status. Now, only 2 people had not arrived. The one who dared to make the emperor and the prince of the neighboring country wait was the Empress Dowager, who claimed to be ill after the princess was restored and didn't dare to appear again. The other one was the princess of Gu State, who had once stirred up a storm in Yuheng and returned to Daiyu State and successfully restored her position. Feng Guerong. Gong Dai looked at Kim Yun, who was sitting on the left side of the emperor, and slightly narrowed his eyes. It was this person who was lucky enough to monopolize the royal sister for nearly 3 years. The banquet was about to begin. At this time, everyone was looking forward to it. For some reason, they wanted to know what would happen when Gong Yimo appeared in front of Kim Yun again. Those who knew the inside story of Gong Yimo leaving Yuheng smiled and didn't say anything. However, those who didn't know thought that they could watch a good show. Feng Guerong, the princess of Gu State has arrived. There was a moment of silence. Everyone, including Gong Dai, noticed that the prince of the neighboring country almost hurriedly interrupted his conversation with the emperor and turned his head to look at the door. His action made Gong Chung smile meaningfully. It seemed that he was thinking too much. During those years when Immerse was in Yuheng, it was likely that the prince of Xiang had a dream, but the goddess didn't have a heart. He couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. If a family had a daughter, hundreds of families would want to marry them. His daughter was so outstanding. He was afraid that there would be more people who would want to marry her in the future. Unfortunately, Gong Yimo had already vowed not to marry for the rest of her life. Gong Yimo strode in. For such a formal occasion, she had to wear her court attire. This court attire was specially made later. There were a total of 12 layers, and the main colors were red and black. This was because the emperor found that these 2 colors could best highlight Gong Yimo's bearing. Just like that day at the heaven-seeking platform, she only wore a red dress and a black collar, but she was already better than countless women in the world. Everyone looked at her step by step as she walked closer. The layers of the dress were like piled-up black waves. Each layer was bordered with gold thread, so the layers were distinct. On top of it, there were deep red and light red flowers, and bright red flowers were blooming. It was too beautiful to behold. It was the first time Gong Yimo wore such a headdress on her head. There were a total of 72 pieces of pure gold hair accessories on her head. It looked very domineering, but Gong Yimo's heart was bitter. It was really unbearable. It could be said that it was the first time in her life that she looked like this. Gong Dai suddenly felt that in the future, when they got married, the royal sister's outfit was very good. It was very suitable to wear on the wedding day. Facing everyone's gaze, Gong Yimo walked in with her head held high and her chest puffed out. With every step, a little of the gemstone flowers on her embroidered shoes would be revealed. Under the bright lights, it was dazzling for no reason. In this way, she walked step by step to the front of the hall under everyone's watchful eyes. Such elegance, such bearing, it made all the women envious. Chapter 288. Imperial Father, this subject's son is late, Gong Yimo said with some embarrassment. Emperor Gong couldn't help but glare at her. Originally, Gong Yimo wanted to go with him to the palace gate to welcome the emperor, but she came today wearing a plain cotton dress. Emperor Gong had to take out the clothes prepared for her during the conferring ceremony in advance and forced her to dress up again. Otherwise, it would be so embarrassing. Okay, go sit down. The emperor's tone seemed to be bad, but everyone could feel the doting in his tone. Kim Yun originally thought that Gong Yimo wouldn't have a good time when she came back, but it seems that he worried too much. Gong Yimo, how could anyone not like her? He stared at Gong Yimo and watched her sit next to the crown prince, diagonally across from him. I haven't seen her for so long. She hasn't changed at all. Feeling Kim Yoon's gaze, Gong Yimo winked at him, which made Kim Yoon laugh involuntarily. That moment of amazement was diluted a lot. No matter how she dressed up, she was still a Mo-er. He looked at her deeply. It's only been a while, but he felt like years had passed. When Gong Yimo was by his side, he didn't feel it. Although he knew that Gong Yimo would leave one day, he never thought that it would be so soon, so sudden. These days, when he walked in the mansion without her, he always thought, if he had expressed his feelings earlier, would the result be different? If he had grasped power earlier, if he had noticed the strangeness of his imperial mother, then would Gong Yimo still leave? Really, he obviously had such a good opportunity, but he missed it. When she wasn't in the prince's mansion, it wasn't the home he wanted to go back to every time he went out. Yuheng wasn't Yuheng. It was like a big cage. He couldn't hear a trace of laughter in it. Emperor Gong glanced at Kim Yoon. The loneliness and longing on his face were so obvious that he couldn't help but change the topic. Before the banquet begins, let's get down to business first. Let's drink a few more cups during the celebration later. That way, we'll be able to get rid of one of our worries. Only then did Jin Yun withdraw his gaze, as if he had just woken up from a dream. He no longer looked at her and readily agreed. That is how it should be. Gong Chung laughed and said loudly, "Send a letter." Chang Shi hurriedly announced, "Send a letter." The so-called letter of credence was the content of the cooperation between the two countries. This was agreed upon long ago. This time, Kim Yoon came. If there were no problems, as long as he stamped the seal, this matter would be officially finalized. A palace servant stepped forward respectfully and presented the two letters of credence that had been prepared long ago. On the two golden brocades, there were neat words in cinnabar that looked like they were printed. It clearly stated the matters after the two countries started trading, responsibilities, and the regulations that had been discussed together. It was clearly and in detail. Kim Yoon glanced at it and knew that there were no problems. As for the cooperation between the two countries, because Emperor Gong Chang had handed it over to Gong Dai, they had a private discussion and agreement. It didn't appear in the letter of credence. Kim Yoon took out the seal and suddenly smiled. Uncle, when Mo-er was in Yuheng in the past, every time there was a major decision, she would be the one to stamp it. This time, this little nephew would like to trouble her again. He smiled, but the words that came out of his mouth stunned everyone present. Everyone had a different meaning in his words, and each had their own thoughts. But Emperor Gong knew that Kim Yoon wanted to say that his relationship with Gong Yimo was very good, and he only trusted Gong Yimo. So he laughed. What's the harm? Mo-er, come forward. Gong Yimo was very embarrassed. She didn't expect that Kim Yoon would suddenly mention this matter. As an outsider, participating in politics wasn't something to be proud of. If the emperor misunderstood, the one who would be in trouble would be her. Sigh. Gong Yimo sighed, resigned to her fate, and walked straight up. During the process, Kim Yoon looked at her with a smile. The expression in his eyes was deeply hidden, but if one looked carefully, one could see a trace of bitterness. Gong Yimo didn't notice and glared at him fiercely. Really, I haven't seen him for a while. How did he become so strange? Taking the private seal from Kim Yoon, Gong Yimo slightly raised her eyebrows and easily stamped it. At this time, in order to ease Gong Yimo's embarrassment, Emperor Gong suddenly laughed. In that case, Mo-er, this emperor's dragon seal will also be handed over to you. You will be the witness of this letter of credence. The emperor's words were equivalent to pushing Gong Yimo to the forefront of a new wave. The emperor's imperial jade seal, that was something that even the crown prince couldn't easily touch. Behind the curtain, many women exclaimed in surprise. They didn't expect that Gong Yimo, who was also a woman, had the qualifications to use the imperial jade seal in this kind of occasion. This honor was really unprecedented. It could be said that she had achieved the pinnacle of being a woman. Kim Yoon's smile froze for a moment, but soon relaxed. Gong Yimo was at a loss. Holding Kim Yoon's private seal in her hand, she felt as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. She thought for a moment and simply held Kim Yoon's private seal in one hand, and the emperor's imperial jade seal in the other. Both of her hands stamped on the two identical letters of credence. Since this was the first step to opening the Golden Age, since it was because of her, then it would be decided by her. This scene seemed to have been arranged by the underworld. Everyone witnessed this historical scene. The letter of credence is complete, the eunuch joyfully shouted, and the whole country rejoiced. From today onwards, there would be no more martial law between the people of the two countries. Not only could they trade, they could even marry. However, the necessary national defense would still be in place, and transnational marriage would still be difficult. It was impossible to truly integrate, but the first step of peace had been taken. At least, Yuheng wouldn't be at odds with Dayu state. This was the greatest political achievement. There were two copies of the letters of credence, and both were solemnly kept by the people of the two countries. Emperor Gong was overjoyed and waved his hand loudly. "Let the banquet begin," Changshi quickly said with a smile. "His Majesty has decreed that the banquet shall begin." Several women in palace attire slowly walked out, and the sound of gong music rang out. They all wore light veils and danced, and each of them had a smile on their faces. It was very festive. The palace servants came in line by line and presented the dishes. The atmosphere became lively, and many people's faces turned red. Today was really a good day. Gong Yimo naturally returned to her seat. She was just about to breathe a sigh of relief and eat something, but she didn't expect that Kim Yun would not let her go. From the moment Gong Yimo approached him, his heart began to beat faster and faster. He also understood what he wanted the most. "Uncle, a straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. This nephew came here this time to ask for a favor." Emperor Gong was so happy that he didn't guess what he wanted to say. "Nephew, there's no harm in saying it." Kim Yun smiled. At this moment, his whole person was like an extremely dazzling pearl. His beautiful eyes fell on Gong Yimo's body, and his tone was full of tenderness and determination. "I want to marry Immerse. I hope that uncle will grant my wish." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.